Audio check, one, two, three. Everybody can keep talking for another 4 minutes. We've got to, let's be too reverent here. For environmental reasons or because they get lost? All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Time is 7 o'clock. This is first up, we have a special council meeting on February 20th. As I call the meeting to order, I just want to acknowledge that we're having this and the next meeting in the traditional territories of the Coast and Strait Salish people. Specifically, we honor the Lekwungen people, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and their connections to these lands and to these waters continue to this day. We have up first approval of the agenda for the special council meeting, moved and seconded. I see a second hand. Seconded, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? That carries. My remarks are be very brief, just to explain why we are this way. I'm Kevin Murdoch. I have the honor of being the mayor of Oak Bay. Following this meeting, we're moving over to Committee of the Whole, and we have a rotating chair of the Committee of the Whole, and Councillor Appleton is the acting mayor this month and will be chairing the Committee of the Whole meeting as the acting mayor. However, this is a council meeting to start with, so I have to chair that meeting. You will notice I'm wearing the official chain of office because as a council meeting, we sit as a legislative body and make decisions. As a Committee of the Whole, we sit and have a more informal and more robust discussion, but we don't make the decisions, we make recommendations back to the legislative body. For convenience, the chair is easiest to chair from the middle, so rather than swapping after this meeting, hence the current location of these two things. With that, we'll just move to the one item on this agenda, which is the special matter meetings of the award of tender for upland sewage separation and water main replacement for the Humber and Ripon Outfalls project. We have Mr. Robertson, our Director of Public Works, Engineering and Public Works, with us to introduce the item. Welcome, Mr. Robertson.
Thank you and good evening. I'm glad to be here tonight on this occasion. Before we get to the report and the recommendations, I'd just like to acknowledge the hard work that staff, past and present, have done to bring this project to life and to get us to the point of being awarded the grant last week and being here to recommend award of the contract for what is the largest capital project in the history of the District of Oak Bay. Particularly, just want to point out John Sturdy, who has come on board this last year to help us get the project to this stage and has brought his expertise along with all of our staff in engineering. It's been a very complex project to finalize and develop the tender for. It fulfills the requirement and our desire to have separate systems for sewer and storm drain in this part of the uplands and to protect the environment. You have before you the recommendations. Number 1, to receive the report. Number 2, to award the contract for the upland sewer separation and water main replacement Humber and Ripon Outfall project to Windley Contracting Limited in accordance with their tender submission in the amount of $13,999,180. And secondly, to extend the existing contract with McElhaney Limited for consulting services for Uplands Humber detailed design to include the scope of work for construction phase services in the amount of $899,829.20. It's anticipated, pending award tonight, that the construction will commence later in March and be concluded by October 2025. I'd like to point out that the sewer separation project tender price was approximately $300,000 or 3.5% below the Class B estimate from 2021, and that we did receive 6 bids. So it was a very good competitive process. I would also like to note that the purchase and supply of streetlights is not included in these awards. That is currently out to tender, and we anticipate being back to council to award that contract in late March. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robertson. Are there any questions from members of council on this matter? I have Councillor Patterson, and I will just note to any members of the public who wish to talk to, like most items on the agenda, we invite public input. So if there's anybody who has public input, we'll take it on this matter as well. That's both online and in the chambers. Over to you, Councillor Patterson.
I'm going to try. I'm going to try to speak. I've had laryngitis for over a week, so bear with me on this. Thank you very much for the report. And yes, I agree with our Director of Engineering. It's been a lot. This has been a lot of work and a long time coming, and I think we're glad to see it before us, particularly with the grant monies coming available. My question, not so much directly related to the upland sewer separation, but the contract administration costs and the management. Just wondering if those costs as outlined are all outsourced costs or if any of them are actually contained within the staffing budgets.
Mr. Robertson?
Through the mayor, those are all outsourced costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Any other questions for Mr. Robertson at this time? Not seeing any. I will turn to the members of the public. If anybody in the public has any questions or comments to staff or council on this matter, I invite you to come forward at this time. I have one online. I believe it's Mr. Zelka. Can you just state your name and municipality of residence for the record, and you're welcome to address council.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
We can.
Wonderful. Hello, my name is Eric Zelka. I live in North Henderson, part of Oak Bay. And congratulations on this project finally moving forward. I do encourage staff, council, excuse me, to vote for option one. It appears to be the appropriate one to go forward. And well done all. Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you. I keep hard not to call you Councillor Zelka, former Councillor Zelka. Thank you, Mr. Zelka. Any other members of the public who wish to address council? Don't see any, so I'll come back to this table.
I'll move receipt.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
I'll read out I think because it's such a large amount, I think I will read it out. I'll move that the contract for the upland sewer separation and water main replacement Humber and Ripon Outfalls project be awarded to Windley Contracting Limited in accordance with their tender submission in the amount of $13,999,130. And that the existing contract with McElhenney Limited for consulting services for Uplands Humber detailed design be extended to include the scope of the work for construction phase services in the amount of $899,829.20.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Seconded. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I would just echo the comments of Mr. Zelka that this has been a long time coming. It's been, I think, since I first started on council in 2005. We were talking about this, and I'm just so thrilled that we're being able to move forward with it. It's going to be a lot of work yet to come, but staff have done a great job, and so thank you to staff for really just staying in there, hanging in there, and getting it to the point where we can now vote on this and move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
Very, very briefly through you to staff, thank you very much for all the effort, especially for the grants and the grant work. I know that writing grants is an art form. It's a very big job, and to land a grant of this size is really impressive. As well, this is a very important environmental issue in our community, so thank you very much for bringing this finally to fruition.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion before I call the question? I'll just make a brief comment on behalf of council and the community. Thank you very much, staff, for getting us across the finish line. I know you've been waiting for the grant announcement to kind of move this forward, so look forward to getting this done in a timely fashion. And I know we'll have a lot of appreciation and a lot of grumbling over the mess as we do a lot of putting new pipes in the ground, but definitely necessary work. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Best of luck with the project. It's going to be exciting. With that, it concludes my
Move
work.
adjournment.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And with that, we will move over to Chair Appleton for the Committee of the Whole.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So I will call this Committee of the Whole meeting for February the 20th, 2024 to order at 7:09. First order of business is the approval of the agenda. Can I moved and seconded? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. Adoption of the minutes. Item 3 is adoption of Committee of the Whole minutes of January the 15th. Moved. Seconded. All in favor, approval of the minutes? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. I think that brings us to delegations. Item 4 on the agenda is with respect to the Zero Carbon Step Code. I believe we have a delegation from Mr. Mark Bernhardt. So I would ask, is Mr. Bernhardt online? Yes?
I am, yes.
Very good. Okay, so Mr. Bernhardt, thank you very much for joining us. As is with delegations to council, there's 5 minutes for your presentation and 5 minutes for questions from members of council. So I'll invite you to welcome to the meeting, and I'll invite you to go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me and letting me come talk today. Just wanted to come out and do something that I've done for all the councils in the area. And sorry, I couldn't be there in person today. I'm actually teaching Zero Carbon Step Code to builders in Nelson today. So that's where I am. I wanted to start by just declaring a few affiliations. I think it's important for everybody that comes and speaks on this topic tonight to declare where your paychecks come from, because that has been an issue in the past in some areas. And so I'm a developer, licensed builder, as well as a certified energy advisor. And I spend most of my time helping other builders build high performance buildings. I'm also the Canadian Home Builders Association provincial vice president at this time. And I wanted to be really clear that today I am speaking as Mark Bernhardt of Bernhardt Contracting. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Canadian Home Builders Association. I believe you received a letter from that association, and so that should stand as the official record. What I wanted to do today too is also try not to tell you how I think you should vote, but answer the question of how worried should builders be about a potential code change, and specifically, going to the top level of the zero carbon step code. And one of the things our team does a lot of is gather data. We have data across the province and across the country on different things, a lot of energy models and a lot of different things we can do with that. And so if we go and look at our stats from the capital region, unfortunately, we do actually have a fair number of houses in Oak Bay, but it's not actually a statistically large sample size. And so one house can throw it off. And actually, in this case, that the stats show that the houses we have in Oak Bay are almost entirely already qualifying for the top step here. So I wanted to broaden that out a bit and give a little bit more regional context. Builders out there that only work in Oak Bay or only work in Saanich, for example. And so this is what the data comes out with for our region here. What we find on heating systems is that about 70% of houses in the region are already using a fully electric system for heating. And about 21% are using a hybrid system. So that would be perhaps a heat pump hooked to a gas furnace working as a pair. And then 9% are heating solely with gas. On the hot water side, it's just a little bit over a quarter that are using gas as a hot water fuel. And now I'm sure there's folks in the audience that would like a gas ban, and there's probably folks in the audience that don't want a gas ban. I think we're going to disappoint everybody here with this code when sort of rubber hits the road on the buildings, because it is not a gas ban. So we're, but it is a curtailment. So we are probably disappointing people on both sides of that. So what this means, though, for houses, here in Oak Bay, is that 74% of homes today built in the last few years will already qualify for the top step. So there are no change required for a builder, for 74% of the builders in the area. Absolutely zero change. We're already there. Many of these homes will still have a gas connection. We are not cutting that cord. So that could mean they still have gas cooking, maybe a gas fireplace, maybe a dual energy heating system of some kind. We are not necessarily cutting the gas line. Of the last 26%, if they switched to a cheaper hot water system, because an electric tank hot water system is cheaper, and then what we would see is about 91% of homes in the area would then meet the top step. Now, it's not 100% because there's some homes out there that are pretty inefficient, and those sort of numbers work back and forth a little bit. So, but generally, if we switched just the hot water for most of the homes, then we're up to above 90% of homes in the area meeting the top step already. Of those last 9%, those homes could reduce their cost to operate and to build by using an all-electric system. So these homeowners have not made a very future-proof decision and are not necessarily choosing things based on cost effectiveness, both for fuel cost and for for life cycle costs such as maintenance and things like that. There are some other rules coming down from the province that will make some of these carbon fuel systems a little bit problematic going forward, forcing needing retrofits that may be highly costly in the future. And so those 9%, maybe not making the greatest decision for the future. And here's an example from Oak Bay. So this house is actually just down the street from City Hall. And in real life, it was built a little bit better than what I'm showing here on the slide. But what I've done is I've taken it down to a Step 3 standard, which would be the base code of where we are today, or the Energy Step Code. And just by its nature and what people are generally choosing in the area, this house already meets the EL3, or the second from the top step, using very base sort of materials. It's got contractor grade windows and really nothing special. To get
Mr.
it up to
Bernhardt,
the higher.
Can I
Yeah.
just interrupt you for 1 second?
Sorry, go ahead.
You're at time. I'm going to give you about a minute to
sorry.
wrap up, please.
Apologies, I can't. I've got one more slide.
Thanks so much.
So in terms of what needs to change in order to get this house to the top step, really it's just the going to an electric hot water, and that is it to get us there. And that can kind of concludes my story here. Just wanted to take a note that people are doing high performance, low carbon in cold climates. And so for the builders out there that are worried, it absolutely can be done in cold climates. It absolutely can be done in Oak Bay. I don't think our level of worry needs to be that high. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bernhardt. Appreciate that presentation. We have a couple of minutes. Are there questions? Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor, to Mr. Bernhardt, I was wondering if you had any comments towards the Energy Step Code. You've done a really good job of summarizing the zero carbon step code, and I just wondered if you had any comments towards, and I don't know if you've seen the recommendations that we'll be looking at today, but with regards to matching Victoria and Saanich's take.
Yeah, so speaking from personal opinion and experience of working in the region, having municipalities cooperate with each other and do the same thing makes life a lot easier. Having a different rule across this street versus that street makes it very difficult to set up a business to operate in an efficient way. And so that's why you will see a number of organizations, including the CHBA, recommending cooperation amongst municipalities. And so I think no matter what you choose to do, cooperation and matching of neighboring municipalities will be a good thing for industry.
Anything further, Councillor Smart? Any other questions from members of council on this item? Seeing none, Mr. Bernhardt, I will thank you very much again for your presentation, and hopefully our subsequent discussion on GHG reductions will be, this will be edifying and informative for you. Thank you very much. So moving on to item 5 on the agenda, which is Mayor and Council verbal reports. I guess it's up to me to decide where I want to start. I don't know whether it's best to start or end with Councillor Patterson, considering she's having issues, but why don't we start with you, Councillor Patterson, and then maybe you can get it over with.
I will make it. I'll make it very, very brief, but I did want to talk about a couple of things that I have attended as of late. One being the Victoria Family Court. Last committee meeting, we had representative from the Moose Hide campaign. I think most of you are familiar with what the Moose Hide campaign is about, but it really encourages people to take a stand against violence towards women and gender inclusive persons. And so Seth, Rikalma, who presented to us, gave us a report just saying how much broadened their campaign is across Canada. And we were heartened to hear that, encouraging all of us to, of course, support the programs which will be forthcoming over the next few weeks. And there will be talks, there will be walks, and all kinds of ways of recognizing this. He also did share with me some extra Moose High campaign little sticker pins that you can pin on. So if council members, I know some probably have them already, but if you don't and you would like one, please, by all means, take one after the meeting. I also wanted to, it's been kind of a busy week because I had also the CREST Finance Executive and Building Committee meetings. And, but I also had the opportunity to meet with the creative crafters at the Monterey Center and share a continental breakfast with them, get to meet the members, and have a thorough introduction to this year's financial success. They broke all of their records of the past. They always do a great job, but this year they leveraged $200 in funding for their group, along with the committed work of all of their very talented volunteers, and probably some supplies donated from around the neighborhood. But they leveraged $200 in actual cash into almost $22,000 of sales that go to fund the Monterey Center. And most of that was done from the very small display cases that are in the front of the Monterey Center. So, you know, it just goes to show how talented this dedicated group of people are. I got to spend time, see what their craft work was, and just have some really good conversation. So I wanted to highlight their success. They don't often get recognized, and that kind of fundraising is just wonderful. So that will conclude my report.
Thank you so much, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Smart.
Well, thank you. It's been I feel like a month of appreciation, attending many things. So the Yes Awards that Councillor Braithwaite works so hard to make happen every year, hearing it being inspired by our youth. It's amazing what the youth in our community are doing. Really enjoyed attending that event, as well as the Municipal Volunteer Dinner. Also enjoyed attending the advisory design panel as backup liaison, and what great work that group contributes. And also the Cool Kit grant event that happened at the Windsor Pavilion. Great event that room was packed. Wonderful to see the community come together to learn about initiatives. And also just I've been attending a lot of educational opportunities on the upcoming building code and the implications that that's going to have for our community. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smart. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm probably going to be reiterating a lot. I'll be very quick though. The next Parks, Rec and Culture meeting is in March, and that will be the first one of the year. The Royal McPherson Theatre Society, their AGM is in May, and they are looking for new board members. So if anybody is interested in sitting on that board, you can do that. So you can apply through the CRD. The BIA, or the Business Improvement Association, is getting ready for the Spring Nosh. I was able to attend a couple of tourism meetings with Councillor Green, and I'm sure she'll fill you in on all of that. The municipal dinner was a really well-attended event. Also the Cool Kit presentation, it was great to see those energy alternatives, and it was really well-attended, which was, I think there was like 100 people in the audience, so that was really nice. And then a huge thank you to all the businesses who sponsored the Yes Awards, and the teachers who nominated the students, and then all of council who were able to be there. We gave out 11 awards. It was the 17th year for these awards, and we gave out 11 awards to some wonderful youth. And don't forget that it's the Councillor Patterson talked a little bit about the money that's raised at Monterey Center. It is their rummage sale this weekend, so don't forget to attend that.
Councillor Braithwaite, did you want to take the opportunity to mention Councillor Braithwaite has cooked my breakfast a couple of weekends running here, so I was just wondering whether Councillor Braithwaite
I'm going to
wanted to
explain
put in
that.
a plug.
Yes, I sit on the board of the Kiwanis Pavilion, and every Sunday from January to April, we cook breakfast at the Kiwanis Tea Room, and all of the proceeds go to Alzheimer's and dementia care, and it's a great breakfast, best view in town. Please come on down, and I will cook you breakfast as well.
Thanks very much, Councillor Braithwaite, and it is the best breakfast in town. Mayor Murdoch, please.
Sure, and thank you, thank you, Chair. I have for this the ability to talk about things at each of the meetings, so I won't cover off things I've covered in the past. But I did have the honor of sitting and representing the community at the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association dinner, which is an annual event and a big one, as they're a really significant partner for us and manage the heritage cemetery down at Harling Point, the Chinese cemetery. Again, fantastic event and just really nice to build those relationships. I had the honor, along with two of the members of council, of attending the UBCM's Housing Summit last week. This is a chance for municipalities to get together with representation from the province and the federal government to talk about some of the provincial initiatives, some of the impacts of that on the various communities, provide some feedback and create a bit of a talking point. So it was very, very well attended. I think there was close to 500 people from across the province attending it. Certainly there's not all the answers figured out yet, but it was certainly a step in the right direction in terms of having a dialogue between the municipalities and the provincial government regarding housing. I just wanted to point out from the CRD, there's a few things that happened at the last meeting that are probably of broader community interest. One was the authorization bylaw, which will allow in the coming decade or so us to borrow up to $85 million for land acquisition or redevelopment. This is a continuation of a previous program that saw hundreds of new housing units built by finding matching funds from the province and the federal government. And we anticipate similar events from this, and certainly very appreciative of the federal and provincial governments over the last few years of starting to reinvest in below market housing and the ability to build some of those. So that money will be spent right away, but it is an enabling bylaw that will then allow new projects to be considered and the municipal governments to participate in that. We as one of the members, of course, contribute to that fund every year, both for the basic housing, but also as part of this initiative. There is there's also the matter of, and the question of whether the CRD will contemplate a broader public performing arts facilities participation is under consideration. It happened in the last term, but we couldn't get agreement on what that should look like. So it's coming back to strategic planning for consideration of whether or not it will become a strategic priority for the organization. So you may hear some more of that coming up. Also approval of another multi-million-dollar underground infrastructure project in Oak Bay, the East Coast Interceptor, which runs along Beach Drive, and the Bowker Creek crossing from the CRD are both being upgraded, so that'll be happening. We'll have to make sure that we time that nicely with our project because it's going to make a mess as well. And last but not least, the Alliance to End Homelessness in the Capital Region, in which I sit as a director, is undertaking a new strategic planning process and had a very significant event with about 90 people, all of the various stakeholders and service providers in the region getting together to help inform what that will look like with the stated goal of getting to effective zero by 2030, which is obviously a pretty difficult task to get to, but that is the intent. So those events are all happening, and you'll probably see some more public events related to those as well in the near future. That concludes my remarks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I hope you benefited by a little bit of extra time. We're not feeling the pressure of being in the center seat. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Since we last provided our reports, I've been to a couple of meetings for the South Island Prosperity Partnership as one of the municipal partners. At that first meeting, the board chair, Frank Bourret, attended, and I think in part because we learned that day that Emily de Rosenroll, the very, very capable CEO, is stepping down on March the 15th, although I am happy to report that a board recruitment process to replace her is underway. So it'll be big shoes to fill. She's done a fabulous job over 8 years, but we look forward to see who her replacement will be. I attended, today I had an opportunity to drop by the archives and just speak to the archivist, Anna Sander, and a couple of the volunteers, the stalwart volunteers who were unable to attend the volunteer appreciation dinner, and just talking about them, the work they're doing. They're busy processing building demolition and building permit records out of our municipal records. But there's also if you wait for a couple of, I don't know how long, I shouldn't say how long it'll be, but the archivist is cataloging right now and soon to be made available on the Oak Bay Flickr site, a whole set of photographs that came out of Larry McCann's estate. So these are all residential buildings in Oak Bay. So this is going to be a real treasure trove and a very interesting addition to our collection in the archives. I also attended a webinar put on by the Community Social Planning Council. I think some other councillors did, on the raft of housing legislation that we and municipalities and our staffs are dealing with. And just one thing of note from that, Brent Tadarian, who's the former City of Vancouver chief planner, he participated, and he made an interesting note about making housing needs assessments, which are part of the work plan, more meaningful documents by including scenario analysis and not just data, to actually look at some different outcomes when we do them. And so I bring that away, and I might talk to staff about that. Also, a very good UDI-sponsored webinar I attended at the end of January on nonprofit housing partnerships, which just underlined how much it takes, what it takes in terms of time, skill, and money to put viable projects together to create affordable housing in the community. And one other thing I might mention, I was really pleased to attend my first Heritage Commission meeting at the beginning of February as the new council liaison, replacing Councillor Smart. And it was a great day to be there because Steve Barber, a Heritage consultant, did a very informative presentation on Heritage Revitalization Agreements and their purpose and how they work and what a commission should be looking at when they receive one of those, and looked at federal standards and guidelines for heritage preservation. A new chair put in place, and it was really, really wonderful to be there, and also to see my first to observe the first two applications, heritage revitalization applications, being presented to that group for discussion. So happy to be of service, and I've had a busy and interesting month. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watson. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. Well, like everyone else, I did attend the Municipal Volunteer Dinner and the S Awards. I think I mentioned that in our meeting last week, but they were both terrific events. And my hat is off to Councillor Braithwaite and her team and staff who participated in helping us put these events on. It was tremendous. I then attended this week 4 meetings with 4 different residents on various issues ranging from fencing to development. And then heritage. And then tomorrow I will be attending the Regional Water Supply Commission as Oak Bay's representative. It meets monthly. And then last week I also attended the Tourism Committee meeting, and I sit on that. Councillor Braithwaite is my alternate, and they are doing a review of how they govern themselves. They're also recruiting 4 members. In fact, Oak Bay is recruiting also membership. I believe it's still open, and Ms. Fleuve will correct me, but for the Accessibility Committee. So this is consistent with the province's new legislation on accessibility in communities, and we are forming a committee to support that work. So if any of you are interested, please apply. And I think that's about it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I will just thank you very much for all the updates. I will just give my brief update in my role as councillor. Attended as liaison to the Heritage Foundation last Tuesday. Productive meeting as always, and I will just point out and remind everybody that the next Heritage Foundation lecture is tomorrow night at 7 p.m. at the Windsor Pavilion on potentially one of Oak Bay's most esteemed residents and former reeve, Rattenbury. And so that's going to be a good one. And I will be attending a meeting on behalf of the library board and won't be able to attend, which I'm kind of upset about, but I encourage everybody to be there. And the other piece of information that I will pass along to council is the last time we gave updates, we had not met as a Greater Victoria, in my role as liaison to the Greater Victoria Public Library. The last meeting in January was on the 23rd, and my colleagues fellow trustees saw fit to re-elect me as chair of the Greater Victoria Public Library Board, which is a great honor and a great privilege, and looking forward to a really productive year ahead and lots to report back to council. Thank you very much. And with that, I will move along to portion 6 of the agenda, which is the public comment and question period. So if we have folks online who are looking to participate in this, in the public participation period, I'd refer you to the dial-in information, the information that's attached to the top of the agenda. It does take a little while for the stream to catch up with where we are, so I'll ask you to raise your hand in advance, *9 to raise your hand. And we'll catch you as we come through the period. I'll also remind everybody that the public participation period is typically for items that are not already on the agenda. Both of the items on the agenda, the GHG reduction piece and the assessment for the new public safety building, are both open for public input. So if you have items, this will be primarily for items that are not already on the agenda. I have one registered speaker. 2 actually, sorry. And so I would start with folks that are on my speakers list. Glenn Irwin is registered and indicated that he was going to be here in person. Mr. Irwin, please come forward. You can come and sit at the podium. There's a microphone there for you to use, and as it is with all of our public participation periods, speakers are limited to 3 minutes. We'll get you to come forward, use the microphone, and I'll get you to just give your name and your municipality of residence, and you'll have 3 minutes. Thank you very much. The microphone's a little button in the very center there, and it'll go red. There you are.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Glenn Irwin. My daughter and I live at 3383 Henderson Road, and I'd like to speak about the infrastructure in the North Henderson area. Henderson Road was designed as a feeder street to a quiet residential area of crescents and cul-de-sacs ending at Murdoch Crescent. In the early 1960s, Henderson Road was connected to the University of Victoria and converted to an arterial. The road base is clay soil with a layer of asphalt. The fragile roadbed has not been able to withstand the impact of heavy traffic, including 3 major bus lines. Water main breaks are commonplace. The failing storm sewer cannot cope with the gushing water, resulted in repeated flooding of basements. When a sewer backup occurred on my property, I employed a reputable plumber contractor. Replacement sewer pipes were delivered, and a 2.3 meter trench was dug in my front yard. The contractor reported that the blockage occurred under Henderson Road on municipal property. I was informed that the sewage and storm water pipes were not properly separated. My visit to the engineering department to apply for permits resulted in the shocking news that I would have to pay $18,890.98 for work done on municipal property. No terms or deferrals are permitted. Failure to pay can result in the debt being turned over to the tax department. Further refusal could result in property being auctioned. Property owners are not permitted to maintain, inspect, or insure public property. Property owners are not permitted to choose a contractor or use updated techniques such as trenchless repair. Only municipal contractors are allowed to do work on municipal property. Recently astounded homeowners have used other adjectives to describe this situation, but lawyers use the word unreasonable. Bylaw 4683, which is an amendment to Bylaw 3891, would not withstand the scrutiny of the media or the strength of a class action lawsuit. Your staff and engineering and public works will sleep better when relieved of the responsibility of enforcing this unfair and unique bylaw. No other municipality charges property owners for work done on municipal land. The irony involved relating to the previous item on the agenda is hard to ignore, referring to the update of the Uplands area. We ask that Mayor Kevin Murdoch and council members repeal bylaw 4683. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Irwin. I also have Ms. Careless on the speakers list for, but I think that you're probably waiting to speak to item 7.1, so I have that as list, so I will call on folks to speak to that item at that time. I see Mr. Zelka online. I see your hand is up. Please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. I'm speaking on a couple of items, but the main reason I'm here is to speak in support of Glenn Irwin on Henderson Road. My name is Eric Zelka, by the way. I do live in North Henderson part of Oak Bay. And I wish to echo and agree with the previous speaker. This is a very unfair bylaw. With respect to the previous meeting, while I didn't agree with much of what the presentation said in the previous council meeting, I did agree with the statement that all bylaws in general across the CRD area should be relatively in alignment. And here, Oak Bay is woefully inadequate and woefully out of step. All of you on council, especially at budget time, are incredibly familiar with how much of a deficit, shall we say, with respect to our infrastructure, the pipes in the ground, and how they are beyond repair and in desperate need of replacement. However, unfortunately, as part of this process, the public has not been made aware that every single connection to every single old house, I happen to be sitting currently in the 1912 Oak Bay house, the connection to the street, this homeowner had to pay $5,000 additional dollars to pay for the pipe connection under the public thoroughfare, which would not have been paid in any other jurisdiction in the Victoria area. And I'm very upset that this bylaw 3891, in particular section 7, has not been repealed or changed or made somehow in alignment with the rest of the CRD. I do wish to ask the engineer, who appears to have some jurisdiction in this area, with respect to section 5 in particular, if the trench is open, section 5 number 2 does give the engineer and staff the ability to provide a 50% discount to the connection that occurs at that time. Why, I need to ask, was this discount not offered to this homeowner? I'll leave it at that for staff to follow up on, but I think section 5 should apply. May I go on to another item, please, with respect to my 3 minutes allocation?
Yes, Mr. Zelka, you've got about 1 minute left.
Wonderful. These comments are for council, but maybe more specifically to a mayor in council who is responsible primarily, I understand, for the dressing of the hall. I'm very upset that our sovereign, King George III, the King of Canada, is not on the wall. I do know it's difficulty getting an image from the federal government. What many other jurisdictions and churches and local authorities have done is they put the Queen back up until a photo or an image has been made available from the federal government or from the Governor General or from the Lieutenant Governor. So I'm upset, and I would hope that this council would consider, and certainly the mayor would consider, a proper dressing of our hall. And if I have any seconds left, my questions, my final comments would be for the chair of the library board. I wish they had not canceled late fees. It has never worked in any other jurisdiction. I don't know how it's going to work here. I can't get access to any books that I put on hold because they're not being returned. So please, if there's any way to reinstate late fees, I would like to be able to access to my books. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zelka. I note that. Thank you very much. Just with respect to the comment directed to the mayor, I'll give the mayor the opportunity to make a comment.
Sure, as best I can. Just on a couple of points that were raised here. One is my understanding is, talking with staff, we're following the protocols given to us by the higher levels of government. So we were told to take down the image of the Queen and not replace it until they give us the official piece of the portrait of the King. So we're just following their advice on that one. Appreciate your input on that. We can double check, but I believe that was pretty clear guidance provided by them. And yes, it's taking a very long time to get an official portrait. I'm not sure why that is. I do just want to just point out too, and I appreciate the comments made on the sewage connection piece, because I know it comes up. We are fairly unique. We are unique in the region in that model. We are not unique in the province or in Canada. Roughly a third or so of municipalities do it this way, and about 2/3 do it the way the rest of the CRD do it. There's pros and cons. One of the primary intentions there is to share so that inspections are welcomed, and in fact, in that way, the homeowners will undertake more proactive scoping of the pipelines, the laterals that are hard for us to get to, but the homeowners do have access to, and in that way discover problems earlier. That being said, the charges are actual costs, so I think in the question of the 50% discount, always the costs are just the real cost. There's no markup. And while the initial amount may be high, quite oftentimes that sort of covers all contingencies, and the balance is provided back at the end of that process. So just want to leave that out there, just so there's some clarity about the actual process attached. But I do appreciate, given that particularly houses that have a long access way, these costs can be very, very high. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. Appreciate the clarification. I think I had somebody else indicate in the room that they wish to come up and speak. Please join us at the podium. If you use them, we need you to use the microphone so that people online can hear you. So again, for any items that are not already on the agenda, and if there's any folks waiting online to speak to that wish to contribute, please do dial that 1-800 number from the agenda and use *9 to raise your hand. So I'll just get you to give your name and your municipality of residence, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Peter de Groot. I'm here in my role as the president of the North Oak Bay Community Association.
Welcome, Mr. de Groot.
I would like to make a few comments with regards to the dilemma faced by Mr. Irwin. I think it is very sad that we still have a bylaw on the books that is, in my view, and in the view of the executive of the association, which read the remarks by Mr. Irwin, it seems very unfair, unjust, that a citizen, an owner, is going to must pay an amount of, say, $18,000 for a problem that has occurred within an outdated, inadequate, blah, blah system. And I wonder if it is not possible for council to, as soon as possible, to rescind that section of the bylaw that is so unjust to the owners of properties in Oak Bay. And in the meantime, if you would consider, if it's possible, to create variances so that those people that are, I would say, almost say, afflicted by the bylaw, that until the section of the bylaw is repealed, that you can give them a variance for not having to pay that amount, so 18,000. It seemed so unjust, and I think if it got to a court, and if you were sitting as a jury, you would agree that this was unreasonable and unjust. So, and also, if you're interested in hearing the opinions from people in North Oak Bay, our association would be very happy to distribute a survey. Our next newsletter goes out in April for our next community meeting, to which the mayor is invited to be the speaker. And so, I just want to support the position of not charging. And also, I know of another situation that happened on Plymouth last year, same situation. The owner across the road was required to pay $16,000. He's a lawyer, he's going to fight it in court. He said, I'm not paying this, sue me. I understand that his spouse says, after the amount was reduced to $12,000, forget it. We can't, we can't cope with this. Too much stress. So please, council members, put yourself in the position that you live at 3383 Henderson Road, and that you're confronted with this situation. you were there, living there with one other person, not a large family, where unwittingly a lot of stuff might be flushed down the toilet that creates the problem. But clearly, this is a dilemma, and I hope that your sense of fairness takes precedent and trumps your financial responsibilities. And I think it's a bit ironic that we have these millions allocated to fixing the problems in the uplands area, whereas in the North Oak Bay community, North Henderson area, we're faced with an outdated, inadequate system. It wasn't mentioned before, but I guess some of you will have heard about the flooding that has taken place there very recently. And some people had insurance, but it is a real problem for individual owners, families. So please think about this aspect of unfairness and unreasonableness in terms of the bylaw. Mr. Selka mentioned we're the only municipality that has this situation. And I understand from some background I've heard that this came into effect, this section, when Oak Bay was in dire straits, and council at that time saw this as the only way open to them to deal with problems like that. That would, yeah, anyway, enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. de Groot. I see another hand raised. Please approach the podium. And again, I'll just ask you to give your name and your municipality of residence, and you'll have 3 minutes. Andreas.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Pamela Slythe. I live at 3403 Henderson Road with my husband and my daughter. My subject is somewhat related to Mr. Irwin in that it covers the infrastructure. At the end of January, and I apologize, I just wrote this all down. I wasn't planning to speak tonight. At the end of January, we were flooded by the Oak Bay water mains for the third time since we purchased our house in 1992. All of us are pretty traumatized. I'll start by saying that we had just finished our renovation to our lower floor and settled back in, and also purchased a brand new furnace in November of last year, which is now compromised and we have no heat. I understand that if I lived in Saanich, I might be able to call the risk management department, who might accept receipts for expenses like our deductible for our insurance or other plumbers or whatever we needed. I've spoken to a lot of people at Oak Bay. No one suggested that there was any help. No one from the municipality of Oak Bay reached out to us that evening or the next day or in the weeks following to assist us in any way or express any concern, not even a business card in the mailbox. After 1 foot, which went over my gumboots, of water destroyed our brand new renovation. I spent the first week peeling apart my wedding pictures, which I was successful. Currently we have no furnace or washer dryer and life is hard. We're all pretty cranky. Neighbors and friends have been helping, but the response from Oak Bay has been disappointing once again. We're just not sure how deep does the water have to rise for a response or assistance to be offered. And just to add to our trauma, we're in the same position as Mr. Irwin. We have no corrode pipes, which need to be replaced, and there is a big break somewhere under the road, past our property line. That's all I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Slythe, and thank you for sharing your thoughts with council. We appreciate you bringing it to our attention. Do we have any other folks in the audience who wish to speak? And I'll just give it a couple of seconds for the feed to catch up. If you're online and wish to speak, please press *9 to raise your hand and we'll include you. Seeing none, I will move along to the next item on the agenda. Thank you very much to everybody who's taken the time to attend and speak. Moving along to item 7.1, which is GHG and energy reduction in buildings and other climate action opportunities. I suppose, Mr. Bowl, I'm going to start with Mr. Bowl and Ms. Rimmel as well. Leave it to you to start and then hand it off to our presenter, as I understand it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Short introduction on my part and a couple of words from Ms. Ramel. This project originated from one of the recommendations of the Community Climate Action Working Group back in March of 2020, and it was subsequently designated as a council priority project in March of 2021. But for a number of reasons, such as staff turnover and limited capacity to start new projects, the project only got underway last year in December. Although we needed to focus most of our efforts last year on housing, we were able to start this project thanks to that we have Mr. Green and Ms. Ramel now in our midst in the office, and Carly will provide a short introduction ahead of the presentation by the consultant. Thank you.
Thank you. So last December, we retained Origin, a firm specializing on intersecting themes of sustainability, policy, and design. They worked with several of our neighboring municipalities on this topic. In addition to the council priority project of developing a GHG retrofit program, we also asked Origin to provide advice regarding options for a possible grant program and other climate action measures. This relates to a council motion from March 2023 that requested follow-up on this matter to seek setting up a program for the earmarked funding. I'm joined today by Devin Miller, who will outline the results of the review and recommendations on both of these matters. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Miller. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, and good evening, Mayor and Council. As mentioned, my name is Devin Miller. I'm with Origin Sustainable Design and Planning, and I was retained to support this work for Oak Bay, and very pleased to be here tonight to walk through some recommendations for energy and emission reduction program opportunities for Oak Bay. Next slide, please. Here we go. So my presentation tonight is broken into section. Then I will provide an overview of Energy Step Code and Zero Carbon Step Code, including a recommended approach for adoption in Oak Bay. Then I will provide an overview of Building Retrofit Program and other climate action program opportunities for Oak Bay. And lastly, I'll pass it back to staff for the council recommendation. Next slide, please. So this work is directed by Council Priority Project number 53 and the Community Climate Action Working Group Report Implementation number 4, which is intended to create 2 separate programs and associated policies to accelerate greenhouse gas and energy reduction in new and existing buildings. Next slide. The first topic that I'll present on is the Energy Step Code and Zero Carbon Step Code adoption for new construction. The BC Energy Step Code, which I'm sure is familiar, regulates the energy efficiency of new buildings, whereas the newly introduced Zero Carbon Step Code directly regulates their greenhouse gas emissions. So in a nutshell, this is the difference between these 2 complementary sets of building regulation. Next slide, please. Now this image will likely be familiar, but the Energy Step Code establishes progressive performance steps in energy efficiency for new buildings from the current BC Building Code level to net zero energy ready buildings by 2032. Next slide. Currently, the Energy Step Code is being implemented in Oak Bay and the rest of BC at the following steps across different building typologies. So Part 9 buildings, houses, duplexes, multiplexes, and townhouses at Step 3, and Part 3 buildings at Step 2. The newly introduced Zero Carbon Step Code differs from the Energy Step Code in that it regulates the carbon emissions associated with operating buildings. Similar to how the Energy Step Code was first introduced, the Zero Carbon Step Code is currently voluntary or opt-in and allows local governments to incentivize or require moderate, strong, or zero carbon performance for Part 3 and Part 9 buildings. Also similar to the Energy Step Code, the Zero Carbon Step Code consists of a series of steps. Strategies to meet the different steps of the Step Code primarily involve the electrification of home space, heating, and domestic hot water systems, as well as appliances as you move to the higher steps of the Zero Carbon Step Code. In some cases, natural gas cooktops and fireplaces are still able to be used at the EL4 zero carbon performance level, depending on the approach taken. Next slide, please. Both the Energy Step Code and the Zero Carbon Step Code have been adopted in multiple municipalities across the CRD, including the City of Victoria, the District of Saanich, the District of Central Saanich, the Town of View Royal, and the City of Colwood. So as shown in the map here on the slide, each of these municipalities has accelerated the adoption of the Zero Carbon Step Code to the highest step available, while just following the provincial timelines for the Energy Step Code from now until 2032. Overall and across the province, so far 21 local governments have referenced the Zero Carbon Step Code in new construction requirements in one way or the other. These communities represent a range of climate zones and population sizes throughout BC's South Coast, Vancouver Island, and Okanagan regions. So you might be wondering why the Zero Carbon Step Code was introduced. This is because of how a building is heated is a primary determinant in building-related greenhouse gas emissions. A well-insulated and airtight new home, so for example, one that's built to the highest step of the Energy Step Code, that uses natural gas for heating, still emits more greenhouse gas emissions than a home that is less insulated and air-sealed, but that uses electricity for heating. So this concept is illustrated in the image on this slide. The Zero Carbon Step Code provides a means of more directly regulating greenhouse gas emissions associated with building operations than the Energy Step Code does on its own. Next slide. So as part of this process over the last few months, we held meetings with industry representatives from the Urban Development Institute, the Canadian Home Builders Association, and Fortis BC. Meetings were determined to be an appropriate level of engagement for this process, given the extensive industry engagement that was held in 2022 in support of the City of Victoria, Saanich, and Central Saanich Zero Carbon Step Code adoption process. Industry feedback is spelled out in the report and summarized here. The feedback is consistent with the feedback provided as part of the regional engagement process that took place in 2022. So UDI and the Canadian Home Builders Association representatives acknowledge that there is benefit to regional consistency on this issue, but both express that there remain concerns regarding the cost implications of this on top of the many other regulatory changes that have been occurring in the development industry in recent years. The Victoria Residential Builders Association expressed concern around adoption of the Zero Carbon Step Code from the perspective of affordability and choice. Fortis BC expressed concern around accelerating to the highest emissions level from the perspective of consumer choice and potential future implications for energy cost rates. Next slide, please. It's important to note that the provincial government has signaled that buildings will be required to achieve the highest performance requirements of the Zero Carbon Step Code by 2030 and the Energy Step Code by 2032. So the highest step requirements in these two regulations are coming in the near future. Next slide. To support energy efficiency and emission reduction in the building sector in Oak Bay, our recommendation is to follow the Energy Step Code and Zero Carbon Step Code adoption timeline that Saanich, Victoria, View Royal, Colwood, and Central Saanich have adopted to improve alignment across the region and support industry with clarity and consistency of requirement across municipal borders. This recommended adoption timeline is spelled out in this table. So the gray column shows the current Energy Step Code requirements in Oak Bay. The recommendation is to align with the regional approach of an accelerated adoption of the highest step, or EL4 zero carbon performance of the Zero Carbon Step Code, starting in July 2024 for Part 9 buildings and smaller Part 3 buildings, and November 2024 for larger Part 3 buildings. This approach does not accelerate on the Energy Step Code and instead follows the provincial timelines for the Energy Step Code set out from now to 2027 and 2032. And this recommended timeline reflects the local government experience, well-established industry expertise, and availability of zero-emission equipment in the southern Vancouver Island region. So before moving on to the next part of the presentation that focuses on building energy retrofits, we thought we would pause in case there were clarifying questions on the Step Code portion of the presentation. Note that the full council recommendation for discussion will be provided later in the presentation, but we wanted to provide a chance for questions on this piece first.
Thank you very much. Questions from council at this juncture. Again, kind of two-part question period here. Councillor Smart, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor, to Mr. Miller. I wondered if you could just clarify for me with regards to this recommendation of regional approach. how many municipalities, I know for instance Victoria, for their low-rise residential buildings is already at step 3. So I'm wondering, this is a unifying approach for all of us to take, but is Victoria, for instance, going to reduce their step requirements? And is already?
Through the chair, thanks for the question. It's a good one. So you're correct in noting that there's a difference in timing for step 3 for low-rise Part 3 residential between Oak Bay and Victoria and Saanich in this proposed approach. The reason that this is currently held at step 2 in the current recommendation is because that is the current base code and is the step that Oak Bay has implemented to date, whereas Victoria and Saanich had previously accelerated to step 3 for this building type in past years when they first adopted it. So because the current recommended approach is to accelerate on the zero carbon step code, but follow the provincial timelines for energy step code, we did not accelerate to step 3 for that particular building type in the current proposed approach. That said, I think you bring up a good point in this. You know, that is sort of fairly common industry best practice to meet step 3 for that type of building. And so, you know, implementation timing for low-rise Part 3 buildings could be changed to better align regionally for low-rise Part 3 buildings at council's direction, but that's currently the reasoning for that difference.
Anything further, Councillor Smart? Mayor Murdoch.
Thank you. Thank you, through you, Chair. Just a quick question for me. Is there built into this a definition of new? Like, is there a trigger point in which a renovation of a building becomes new and is required to comply with the zero carbon step code?
Yeah, this is this would not apply to major renovations. This is to brand new home construction. Yeah, so it does not get triggered for. I guess do you have a specific question instance in mind? But for new construction permits is what it will apply to, not renovations or retrofits.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
That was exactly my question.
Very good. Great minds and all of that. Any other questions from council to our guest at this juncture? Then I'll invite you to proceed.
Okay, the next topic in the presentation is on opportunities to reduce energy and emissions associated with existing buildings in Oak Bay. So home and building retrofits are an important tool for lowering greenhouse gas emissions and improving occupant comfort in existing buildings. And while the BC Energy Step Code and Zero Carbon Step Code are key for improving energy efficiency and carbon emissions in new buildings, home energy and carbon retrofits are important to lowering overall emissions from the building sector in Oak Bay more broadly. Next slide. So there's a number of existing retrofit programs that are currently in market, delivered by different levels of government. So in the provincial government, under the Clean BC plan, there's the Better Homes and Home Renovation Rebate Programs and the Clean BC Income Qualified Program. Under the federal government, through NRCan, there was the Canada Greener Homes Grant, which ended about 2 weeks ago for new intake, but it is understood there's going to be a follow-up program to that in the coming months. There's also the Oil to Heat Pump Affordability Program that NRCan runs as well. And locally, and through local government and regional government, the CRD runs a Home Energy Navigator program. There are 2 pilot programs that may be of relevance to the Oak Bay context. So Vancouver has a rental apartment retrofit accelerator pilot program, and Victoria has a market rental revitalization tax exemption pilot program, both of which target sort of aging rental buildings, 3- and 4-story rental apartment buildings. And then Saanich and Central Saanich have a heat pump financial incentive program currently. Next slide, please. So in terms of opportunities for Oak Bay, as I said, currently there's multiple programs that are focused on retrofits of existing buildings across multiple building typologies. Programs are shifting, as we just saw with the Canada Greener Homes Grant closing 2 weeks ago, which makes it a bit difficult to determine if municipal top-ups are appropriate or needed currently. There is definitely an opportunity for Oak Bay to promote the CRD's Home Energy Navigator program to increase participation. There's already been some good participation by Oak Bay residents through there, and additional promotion would increase that participation. So given this shifting nature of the programs, our recommendation for this particular element is to consider allocating resources for marketing and communications around the Home Energy Navigator program. So for example, to be used for mailouts, handouts, ads in Oak Bay News, things of that nature, and to consider top-ups to existing programs where opportunities present themselves given that shifting nature of the programs. Okay, the last topic to cover in the presentation is other climate action program opportunities that Oak Bay could consider developing to support community emissions reductions. So while the adoption of the Zero Carbon Step Code and support for home energy retrofits will lower emissions in new and existing buildings, there are some other climate action programs that could be developed to lower overall community emissions. Opportunities that we'd recommend exploring in future processes include an e-bike and EV charger rebate program to support reducing transportation-related emissions in Oak Bay, and an electric garden equipment rebate program to reduce the emissions associated with this type of equipment in the community. So once again, we've built in some time for any clarifying questions on this section of the presentation before moving on to the council recommendation.
Questions for our guest, Councillor Watson?
Thank you. Actually, back to, I just wanted to know about the timelines with respect to Saanich, Victoria, Central Saanich, View Royal, and Colwood in terms of their implementation of the Zero Carbon Step Code Level 4, and what the lapse time was between their identifying that as an option and actually making that a requirement in their own building bylaws.
Sure. It might be helpful if we could scroll back to slide 15 to answer this question. So Victoria and Saanich and Central Saanich adopted the Zero Carbon Step Code to the highest step, and it was first implemented in November of 2023. So they were ahead of us currently. The timing that we've recommended here is to pick up with the next increase, the next implementation time frame that Victoria and Saanich and Central Saanich have done, which is July of 2024. So that would be the improving the alignment there. The one difference to that is that Colwood just adopted starting in March of 2024 as opposed to July of 2024. So that is a slight difference of 3 or 4 months. And then to your second question around lead-in time, it was they provided about 6 or 7 months to industry between this type of presentation and to implementation, which is fairly aligned with the time frame that we have allocated for here, should things go forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Any other questions from council at this juncture? Seeing none, please proceed, Mr. Miller.
Thank you. I will now actually pass it back to staff to present the council recommendation.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So these council recommendations are consistent with what is in the staff report, that the staff report be received and that council consider the 3 following recommendations. So the first is that the amendment be that staff prepare an amendment to the building and plumbing bylaw to align with the 2024 timelines. We've encapsulated the step code as well as a zero carbon step code, just to give staff a little bit more latitude on drafting that amendment in relation to the step code. And that the second is that council approve funding for up to $10,000 for the climate grant and operational budget for promotion of the GHG energy retrofit. So that would be to mostly focus on supporting the CRD home energy navigation program, getting more information out in the community. while we wait to fill the role for the senior planner that could kind of move that program forward and meaningful changes in the community. And lastly, that staff prepare a report regarding the feasibility and resource requirements for grant and rebate programs, in addition to existing provincial and federal retrofit programs, as well as the rebate program and options for e-bikes, EV charging, and electric garden equipment. Again, with the shifting landscape, just think that there's more opportunity to continue to look at this and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rimmel. So just for the members of the public, we will seek any further questions from council, of staff, or our presenter. And then once we've gone through that, those questions, then I will ask for public input, and then we'll seek motions from council. So any questions, Councillor Green?
Thank you very much for the report. And my only question is, in terms of the recommendations, does this mean that until these things are completed, there would be no formal implementation, or we will implement and then support the program? If you could just give me an understanding of that. Thank you.
Are you specifically talking about the first recommendation with the building bylaw, or are you referencing the grant programs?
The grant program.
The grant programs. So yeah, I believe the recommendation on that is that we would just like to do some further exploration. And once the senior planner for the climate action comes on is when that would kind of be picked up and move forward.
A second question, thank you. Through the chair to you, thank you very much for that. Do you have any a timeline in mind when that senior planner might be appointed or recruited and brought on, just roughly, approximately? Thank you.
Mr. Bull.
Through the chair, that recruitment process is in process. So hopefully we can confirm somebody in the next weeks or months, and that work will get underway hopefully this spring. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the only reason I wanted to ask that question was to let the public know that this is definitely in progress and not sort of a wait and see, without a date. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks. That was actually one of my questions. I do have another couple of questions. First, this is so timely. It's great that this is coming forward now. So thank you to staff for that. I'm wondering about the timing to change the bylaws. How much staff time does that take, and is that able to be done before July? I'm assuming it is because you're suggesting this.
Ms. Rimmel?
Yeah, we will try and do that as excuse me. We will be trying to bring that bylaw back as soon as possible, depending on the council direction that we receive this evening. If council directs us this evening, then we will try and bring that bylaw, that amendments bylaw, back to council as soon as we are able, and prior to a climate action planner being in place, given the need to ensure that there is that implementation period and to give industry the time to amend the proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. And then a couple of the letters that were attached to the presentation, and just a couple of points that I just want to bring up, just because I would like just an explanation on them. I'm sure there's a good explanation for why these letters were talking about this. But one was about the radon, and I think this was from the VRBA, a letter from the VRBA talking about this. And can you touch on that? And because obviously that's a concern that they're bringing up, and I just want to ensure that we are able to let the public know that this is not something that, or it shouldn't be something that they should be worried about.
Go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Through the chair, so I'm not a radon specialist. However, what I do know is that there are steps being taken by the provincial government to increase testing for radon in I think it's often in basements of homes is where it might come up into play. To my knowledge, there's no connection between that and the zero carbon step code and what we're discussing today directly.
Thank you for that clarification. And then the other thing that came up from one of the letters that was attached was from UDI, and it was talking about stretching homes capacity from a standard 200 amp service to a 400 amp panel, and the costs that were around that. And do we have any information around that about other municipalities, whether they've run into that issue as well?
Mr. Miller.
Through the chair, I assume that that has happened. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in the letter, of course. To my knowledge, that would likely occur in sort of larger homes. And so I think that could be an issue in certain cases, but I don't know that it's a very common one.
And I'll let
Please.
someone else ask a question now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I think I've got a couple of questions for staff and maybe one for Mr. Miller. I wanted to ask in the proposal for the adoption of the zero carbon step code, what happens to applications in progress? I mean, I suppose this would apply for other bylaw changes too, but what do you envision or what will happen for applications that are on in progress if we adopted a July 1st implementation date for the code? That's my first question.
It's probably to staff. Mr. Bowl? Or, okay, Mr. Miller.
Through the chair, yes, it's a good question about sort of in-stream applications and that sort of thing. Typically, because it is building bylaw, it's the cleanest way to do it is just sort of as soon as they move forward for the building permit, after that date, it applies, as opposed to any sort of in-stream application type of thing. So that's typically what we see in terms of other municipal timeframes of adoption.
Anything further, Councillor Watson?
Yes, I wanted to know, again, maybe from staff, who monitors compliance for this particular aspect of a building if we adopted the code?
Ms. Rimmel.
Through the chair, the building officials would be responsible for monitoring compliance. And just to build on to the last comment there, we also intend to send out information to current building permit applicants to again try and target those people that are in active permits and are in the building community to again try and get some specific outreach to give them the heads up about the July 1st proposed date.
Thank you. And then finally, and maybe this is to Mr. Miller, but it might be to staff, will solutions to address the code, is the code agnostic as to how you do it, or are you told? Is it just really fuel source that's the issue, or is it also how you go about addressing this? So for example, if somebody, it's probably unlikely, but if somebody in Oak Bay wanted to build a rammed earth house with solar panels, are they going to be forced to do certain things that they may not want to do because we've adopted this? Or do they have latitude to meet the standard by doing things their own way?
Through the chair, it's a great question about the nature of the code and whether it's prescriptive or performance-based. One of the things that I think is good about the energy and the zero carbon step code is it's what we would call a performance-based code. And so it is agnostic as to the strategies for achieving the targets required through the code. It is not prescriptive. Builders can opt to take a prescriptive pathway for compliance, but more often than not, they will take performance-based. And so they just have to show through energy modeling and on-site testing and things of that nature how they've met those targets. The specific, there's so many different potential strategies, lower performance or high performance design strategies that can be undertaken. There might be other elements of the code that come into play there around structural or what have you, but purely from the perspective of the energy step code and the zero carbon step code, it's a performance-based pathway, and builders can use the strategies they want to do to meet those thresholds. That said, it should be clear with the zero carbon step code is that it does limit, doesn't eliminate, it does limit the use of natural gas as a primary heating and domestic hot water source.
Thank you.
Mayor Murdoch.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just a couple of very quick questions. Do we have a sense, I know there was in the letters raised the concerns about additive costs to housing. Do we have any sense, appreciate the zero carbon probably doesn't have significant, that's sort of a choice of energy source at time of build, but the step from the energy step code, do we have a sense of what those, the dollar per square foot of various types of buildings difference is?
Mr. Miller.
Through the chair, yes. So there have been studies on studies on studies, costing studies for the Energy Step Code. I'm afraid I don't have those numbers offhand right now, but there certainly has been a lot of costing studies. And what I'd say regarding the proposed approach of following the provincial timelines for the Energy Step Code, it really helps to mitigate that cost implication for new construction, because that is where the code is going anyways, right? And we're not accelerating on those in the Energy Step Code. Strategies that are commonly used for the Energy Step Code tend to have more of a cost implication than those, as you noted, for the Zero Carbon Step Code. So this approach of accelerating on the Zero Carbon Step Code while following the provincial timelines for the Energy Step Code helps to mitigate those costs, because typically your cost premium is calculated in comparison to the base code, and we're just following the base code from now to 2032.
Okay, thank you. Sort of an early adopter premium if it's not standardized and you're sort of more custom building the things to meet those code pieces. I thank you for that clarification. And so that's just, and that was what ties into Councillor Smart's question earlier. I'm just trying to get my head around. So I didn't quite catch the specifics. Most of the area is following the provincial timelines on the Energy Step Code, but 2 of the jurisdictions locally are speeding that up. Is that correct? Or have adopted the higher levels of Step 3 for Part 3 buildings?
That's correct. I realize there's a lot of steps and parts that we're saying right now that it can be a bit confusing.
And I always love how the inversion, so the larger the Part 9 is smaller than a Part 3 building. And
Yes,
it's all,
yes. It's making it extra complicated. I'll try to do my best to be very clear. So for small Part 3 buildings, 6 stories or under, Victoria, Saanich, and Central Saanich have all adopted Step 3. And they had done that in 2018 or 2019. In fact, I was part of the team in City of Victoria that did that. So they've had that adopted for a while. Currently, Oak Bay requires Step 2 for that building type. And that is where the building code is right now. And so that is the one discrepancy for regional alignment, is basically that one building type, as Councillor Smart had noted.
okay, thank you. I do note that the applications that we've had have interestingly, as sort of a community amenity provided for Step 3 as a minimum anyway, but I appreciate that. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mayor Murdoch. Any further questions? Councillor Smart.
Well, thank you. Through Acting Mayor to Mr. Miller again. Could you, I guess, describe a little bit the sort of jump in construction from Step 3 to Step 4? I understand Step 4 is a little bit closer to passive house construction with extra insulation, whereas Step 3 still uses a very conventional building approach still. And speak a little bit to Step 3 and what it really means.
Mr. Miller.
Through the chair, thanks for the question. I think you categorized it quite well. Step 3, is really focused on sort of air tightness, a bit more of a, let's call it a traditional building envelope approach. As you move into those upper steps, Step 4 and Step 5, you're looking at a beefier building envelope, more insulation, more focus on that air tightness and things of that nature. So that's really I'd say the primary difference there from the Energy Step Code side of things.
Further questions, Councillor Smart? Councillor Green.
I was going to move the motion if that was agreeable to the chair.
Before we move to motions, I'll ask for feedback from members of the public. I think there's quite a few folks that are here to speak to this item. So if there's no further questions at this time, I will invite the public forward. And thank you, Mr. Miller. We appreciate your presentation very much. And thank you very much. Members of the public that wish to speak to this item, again, I'll ask you forward. Same rules apply. We'll ask you to keep it to about 3 minutes, and we do need your name and municipality of residence. So if there are folks here who wish to speak to this item, please come forward. Welcome.
Hi, remember to turn it on. Hi, I'm Andrea Careless, and I'm with the Oak Bay Climate Force. I just wanted to mention something with respect to radon. I worked for the Ministry of Environment in air quality and climate change for 25 years, and radon was one of our concerns. And I'm not a scientist, and I was just looking it up just to verify, but radon isn't a big issue all along the coast. Obviously, there are pockets anywhere that there could be radon, but it's really not something like the interior is a place where it has worst incidence of radon. This should still be testing, and there are ways, construction techniques and sealing concrete and just new construction techniques that can deal with radon. So I just wanted to address that because it came up. So, good evening, Mayor and Council. On behalf of the Oak Bay Climate Force, I've been advocating since my presentation last June that Council adopt the Zero Carbon Step Code and align with the accelerated timelines as Saanich, Victoria, and the other early adopters have done. So you already know where the Oak Bay Climate Force stands. Also, you've received many submissions from individuals and environmental groups advocating for this. I did want to make one comment, so I'm not going to talk anymore about that because you've already heard from me. I did want to make one comment, and that's about the term stakeholders. As I mentioned, I worked in the Ministry of Environment, and it's always struck me that stakeholders are considered to be industry and business, but not the public, and obviously we are. Certainly the needs and the concerns of industry must be taken into serious account when any government is considering changes that might impact it. I've been involved in such consultations myself. However, the public are also stakeholders, and our views are just as important as those of industry. And that's not at all to say that we're on opposing sides, but the public needs to be heard. So in the case of adopting the Zero Carbon Step Code, I would hope that our concerns are indeed taken also into serious account. So our concerns about the fact that we haven't come close to reaching our greenhouse gas reduction targets in Oak Bay, Canada, and across the world. Our concerns about how climate change, which is intensifying faster than scientists expected, will impact the future of our planet, all life on Earth, and generations of people to come, and that future includes the economy. We're already suffering from climate change impacts even in Oak Bay. The Zero Carbon Step Code is a relatively simple way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have the technology, and there's no need for gas in buildings anymore. And we also have the example of the other bylaws that have already been amended. Now, I don't know about municipal bylaws, but in government, we have written bylaws for local governments that other governments have followed, and it's made it a lot easier for them. So I kind of wonder if the bylaws that have already been written or amended by Victoria and Saanich may help Oak Bay move faster. The aforementioned municipalities have done thorough consultation and research and concluded that adopting the code on the accelerated timelines is the right thing to do. And now our own staff and consultant have reached the same conclusion, and thank you for all that work. It's heartening. I trust and hope that Oak Bay Council will pass staff's recommendation and join with the other leaders in the CRD. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Careless. I see Mr. Zelka online. You have your hand raised. Please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and it's been a very interesting presentation. Yeah, I just wanted to ask with respect to the motion that most likely will be on the floor soon. For any grant or rebate program put forward by staff, I hope there will be a means test. I know, of course, most of us know here in Oak Bay, most people who live here are, shall we say, rich, house rich, but cash poor. So hopefully a means test will help with that with respect to any retrofitting grants and rebates or for the new home folks with respect to grants and rebates. So just please be gentle, be careful with our tax money. And following out from that, I really have to ask, why would something like this be supported from general taxes, but not, for example, the sewer pipes as raised during the public, when members of the public had a chance to speak earlier on in this meeting. I asked that rhetorically speaking. I don't expect an answer, but I do find it interesting that general taxes might be asked to do this, but not help with general pipe failures. Um, moving on, I wonder whether possible someone could share what is the percentage of Oak Bay houses and buildings that are still supported and heated by oil furnaces. It's great that there's a provincial program or possibly federal program to help with oil to natural gas or oil to some other fuel, but I still see trucks driving around Oak Bay, oil furnace trucks, oil delivering oil into tanks in the backyards of people's houses here in our fair district. And I would imagine that that would be the greatest need, as opposed to encouraging folks in new homes to stay off of natural gas. I do notice a new home only for this for some of these things because we're fully built out. It'll be very little effect there. For retrofits, please focus on the highest impacts, oil furnaces, for example. Condo, helping them in apartments with electric plugs. I know the province is helping with that, but not a lot of condos are getting their electric plugs put in their common areas. Great difficulty in that area. Maybe Oak Bay can help with that as a greater impact. And I do notice some folks here in Oak Bay are putting extension cords across the public boulevard to charge their electric cars. There are many houses that don't have driveways. In fact, you are changing our bylaws to not allow driveways. Where are the electric plugs going to go to feed these cars that are now not only on the road, but possibly pushed out even further into the road with bike lanes most likely coming? For example, in the Upper Henderson, where people's front yards most likely will disappear in Upper Henderson to make room for the bike lanes that are to come. I would really hope that it'll be part of the report that'll come back from council. And the last thing I'll share is with respect to radon gas. Let's be very, very careful, please. I bought a radon gas detector in Upper Henderson. It did show I have radon gas. The solution for me, and only me, is fresh air. Now, luckily, I don't have a lot of insulation in the basement. I have lots of fresh air coming in, along with the silverfish, because as Mount told me. However, let's be careful, but if we don't create another leaky condos or another urea formaldehyde off-gassing with our unintended consequences. Fresh air heat exchangers are essential with airtight houses. Yes, and when we talk about code, it sounds like the zero carbon code is voluntary, whereas the energy step code is regulatory and mandated by the building code. If someone could please clarify when one is voluntary and the other one is mandated, I would very much appreciate that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Zelka. I appreciate that input. Do we have anybody else online or in council chambers that wishes to present to council on this item? Seeing no hands online or folks coming forward, I will bring this back to the council table and we'll seek a motion. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thanks to everybody else who participated and the public as well, very much. There were many, many, many letters. So I'd like to move the staff recommendation and the first clause that staff prepare an amendment to the Building and Plumbing Bylaw number 4247, 2005 for step code and zero carbon step code changes as per the timelines outlined for 2024 in this staff report. Clause 2, and that council approve funding for up to $10,000 from the climate grant operational budget for promotion of GHG energy retrofit programs for existing buildings during 2024. And third, and that staff prepare a report regarding the feasibility and resource requirements for grant and rebate programs, in addition to existing provincial and federal retrofit programs, for example, Clean BC, as well as rebate program options for e-bikes, EV charging, and electric garden equipment.
Discussion on the motion on the floor. Councillor Smart.
I'd like to move an amendment on the motion.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to move an amendment and that staff revise the energy step code timeline for Part 3 residential buildings of 6-story buildings or less to 2024.
The amendment motion is on the floor. Do I have a seconder? I will second for discussion. Do you wish to motivate, Councillor Smart?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm moving this motion, being quite familiar and having worked as an architect on buildings under Step Code 3, and it really is, with the earlier adoption of Victoria and Saanich, a current best practice. And I don't feel that with the fact that Oak Bay has fallen behind in its leadership a little bit with the energy step code, that we need to keep that status quo for 3 more years, when I feel it's quite an obtainable level to reach. And I'd really like to see us with that particular building typology and a building that is going to be built to last, I hope, 50 or 75 years, that when we start to build these buildings, they are at least to a certain standard. With the energy step code, the construction is not something that you can change easily later. So once these buildings are built, they are built. And I think that this is an important small tweak to the recommendations. And as we heard from the consultant, there is still a regional approach in this amendment, being that Victoria and Saanich would be aligned, which are our largest neighbors.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smart. Any further discussion on the amendment to the motion on the floor? Seeing none. Oh, Mayor Murdoch.
I'm not sure if I have a cogent thought on this or not. I take Councillor Smart's point, and I'm torn here a little bit between the comments and discussion we had with the consultant and the pros and cons laid out in the staff recommendation, which is, I think, a more conservative and aligned approach, certainly provincially, although noted, and then versus the more alignment with the 2 larger partners we have adjacent to us, which have taken a more forward look at it. I guess this boils down. I'm just thinking out loud here a little bit between the real cost of doing those versus the benefit of the step 3 over step 2. Maybe it would help my understanding of the pros and cons a little bit if I could understand a little bit more what the real world implications of step 3 over step 2 on a part 3 building looks like in terms of, and maybe this is to our consultant, Mr. Miller, or to staff, but if I think Mr. Miller being called forward, what, like from a environmental or energy consumption perspective, and again, this energy is going to be non-carbon at this point, but at the energy consumption perspective, what is the difference between a building that has step 2 versus step 3? What does it actually look like?
Go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, through the chair. So the energy step code, the performance targets for the energy step code, there's 3. There's total energy use intensity, which has to do with the mechanical system and how much energy it takes to heat the space and things of that nature. There's the thermal energy demand, which is a fancy term for how well the building envelope performs. And there's an air tightness target as well. So step 3 for part 3 buildings, I would say I agree that it is sort of a common industry best practice because it tends to be built from wood, which has low thermal bridging potential, so it tends to be an efficient building type as it is. I think, as I said before, the reason why we brought forward the step 2 was that was just what had been adopted by Oak Bay previously and hadn't been accelerated previously. Not necessarily as an indictment of step 3 being too far in advance or something like that, because it has been required in neighboring jurisdictions for the last several years. So I don't know if I illustrated that super well in terms of the difference, because it is kind of hard to describe how it wouldn't look necessarily differently. It's just the level of insulation, and maybe you got triple pane windows, for example, on a part 3 building and things of that nature. But it's those strategies that the attention to detail of those different strategies that are taken into account for the difference between those steps.
Sure, thank you. So maybe a way for me to kind of comprehend this, because sometimes, the value I see of moving this forward is the incentive is often to reduce capital cost of a building, even if the operational costs are higher. And obviously, I think it's helpful for us to sort of consider that in our pieces. Do we have a sense of is there a time for energy, payback, going from a step 2 to a step 3 building that a typical building would take? If you put the capital up front, you might make that money back in operational savings over the course of 10 or 20 years. Do we have any sense of that?
It's a good question, but that's a really case-by-case basis. It's kind of hard to make blanket determinations on that, I'm afraid. That type of data is included in those provincial costing studies. They look at everything from capital cost, operational cost, to life cycle cost and payback and ROI and all sorts of that sorts of thing. And as we said before, Part 3 buildings, 6 stories and under, have been required to build to Step 3 in neighboring municipalities in the last couple of years.
Okay, thank you. I guess based on that feedback, I think, pending conversation with other people at this table, I think I'm inclined to support the amendment. I think that there's there's enough local expertise and capacity to support that. But I am curious to hear from other members of the committee as well, because I think this is one of those ones where there's arguments to be made on both sides. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Patterson, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will support the amended motion as put forward. I have felt for some time that Oak Bay should have already have adopted Step 3 for Part 3 buildings. I think for the types of buildings that are being constructed in Oak Bay, and certainly for the market, the prices that the buildings are marketed, it's the right thing to do. I felt that for some period of time, so I think that it would be appropriate that we accelerate moving forward on this. I think it's appropriate, and we can show leadership here.
Thank you very much, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks. I'll ask the same question as I asked before, and that is in regards to staff time for something like this. Would this add a huge amount of time and work onto what the staff have to do in a short period of time? Or is it, as someone has suggested, just a case of looking at the other municipalities who have already done this and taking their bylaws and putting them into place and utilizing what they have already done?
Mr. Bull.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, the bylaw amendment itself is pretty straightforward. And in terms of staff time for application review, the other thing that happens with step code and zero carbon code, yes, we do take a look at what is being submitted, but a lot of hinges on the energy advisors and specialists outlining how things are approached, and that's where really the design work takes place. So for us, it's more of a check mark. Okay, has the report been provided? So between the options, there's not a difference in staff time. Thank you.
Councillor Green and Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I too will support the amendment. I think particularly in the context of the housing legislation and the push for density or the race for density in communities like Oak Bay, these will be important initiatives that will protect us and encourage quality building in the municipality. And that's why I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Watson.
Just a comment really and a question. Thank you, Chair. I am concerned about proposals that may be in the pre-development stage that we are not aware of that suddenly would have a changed building program. And I wonder how we would know about those and how they would be supported if they've suddenly got to change approach. So I guess that's a question to staff. If we accelerated the adoption of the Energy Step Code level to what we had previously been suggested we do, which was just stay the provincial course, who might be negatively affected in the development community because of the change in timeline?
I'll give that to Mr. Bull, and you can redirect as necessary, Mr. Bull.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. We don't always know who is designing what just yet, right? It depends on the building permit submission. For single family, that's probably the least visible because it's a simple, straightforward building form. and usually the package comes in when it's designed, and probably the preparation times will vary from a designer or contractor to contractor. I think in this case, if whatever the decision is today, I think we do need to follow up if the parties that we know, and also publicly, to make sure that we announce that these changes are coming now as recommended at the stage this summer, and that will give some preparation time that way, and that hopefully, if we stick to a summer implementation date, that should be enough time, I hope. But if there's issues, then we can navigate that, and if we become aware with the staff, there's probably around the time that it becomes active, there might be a bit of a rush for some people to make sure that they're in under the old bylaw provisions rather than the new, and that's fair. You can do that at that time. So there's a couple of ways to make sure that it's known to the industry and to individual applicants. So that's how we would approach it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ball. Further questions, Councillor Watson? Mayor Murdoch.
So thank you, and through you, Chair. Just building on Councillor Watson's comment there, what I heard in the motion was to advance this from 2027 to 2024 without a specific month. And I'm just curious if that wording gives enough leeway for staff to kind of just, if this direction passes, that you can look at that within this year, not necessarily in the same July 1st. Is that, Councillor Smart is nodding as well, that not necessarily the July 1st, but advance it from 2027 to 2024 at some point? Does that help? I guess is the question.
I am seeing agreement from Councillor Smart, but I will give it to Mr. Bowl to comment on that. Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, would be either good to have this spelled out, or our understanding would be that it's parallel to the recommended zero carbon step code introduction as of July this year. Thank you.
Well, I guess for my clarification, the zero carbon essentially changes the heating element of the building, but the ESC changes the design of the building. And so I think what I'm hearing is that in the concern here, just to make sure that we're not creating undue hardship, that there be a reasonable lead time. I'm seeing nods from Councillor Smart. So the wording right now is just in 2024. So through you, Chair, I don't know if there's, I don't know if it's for us to give a specific date, as long as I think if it's this year, I don't know.
Well,
I'm happy to sort of, suggest an amendment to the end of 2024, by the end of 2024, that the language reflect by the end of 2024.
I think possibly if, okay,
I'd
go
like
ahead.
to hear from, I'd like to hear from.
Go ahead, Mr.
Hal
Hal.
first, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. We're trying to figure out an answer here, and there's a couple of things I heard and saw. Mr. Green was noting that of this particular category, there's very few applications typically. So right now we don't have anything that we know of as in the pipeline, and I think Mr. Miller was making a suggestion there. I think that maybe November is a good timeline for that, and that would give a little bit of extra lead time for that change. Thank you.
I still have the floor. I think I'll leave the motion as is. I think with that and a nod, I think the understanding is by November is clear, if that's sufficient for staff. I think it's just we didn't want to pigeonhole it too much, but I'm comfortable with that recommendation from staff and the consultant. So thank you.
Just to confirm on the record, Councillor Smart, that's acceptable to you, in November timeline?
Yeah, the November, leaving it open to the possibility of later in the year to give applicants more time sounds wise to me. So
thank you, Councillor Smart. Councillor Green.
Thank you, and through you to well, everyone. And it's probably stating the obvious, but I think a communication strategy with the development community, with our own community and so on would be really helpful as well, just to alert them to changes in case someone is out there, looking at plans and are dancing, with excitement. I think it would be important to inform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. I appreciate the discussion on this topic. So we have the amendment to the recommendation on the floor to accelerate the timeline for low-rise wood buildings to step 3. I will call sorry, go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Yeah, may I ask a procedural question? Because I also wanted to make an amendment to this particular motion. Will we do that after this vote is taken? Or do you want to
Are
hear
you
it
speaking
now?
about an amendment to the amendment or an amendment to the motion?
Well, it's kind of an amendment to the amendment because the motion is about the plumbing and building and plumbing bylaw and implementation timelines, and both the zero carbon step code and the energy step code are in there, and I would like to speak to the zero carbon step code timing implementation. So I'm not sure, actually, because it's just one motion.
I think for clarity and just and for clarity for council and everybody seeing, I think we would probably seek to vote on this amendment first, and then you could bring up a separate amendment to the motion that's on the floor. The main motion is on the floor at the moment, so I think we would first call the question on the amendment, the first amendment brought by Councillor Smart. So if council is amenable, then I will call the question on that amendment. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Okay, so the main motion is on the floor. Councillor Watson, if you wish to propose a second amendment to the amendment on the floor, you can bring that forward.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to propose an amendment to the motion, and that is that the timeline for the implementation of the zero carbon step code be delayed until September the 1st, 2024. So that's my motion. It is as to timing.
Do we have a seconder for that amendment? Seconded by Councillor Patterson for discussion. Thank you very much. That amendment is on the floor. Did staff capture the wording of that amendment? Thank you. And discussion on the, sorry, excuse me.
Would you like me to
go ahead and
motivate?
motivate.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Councillor Watson, thank you.
So I've moved that it's a small change from what's proposed, but I think it's important more than just symbolically. I think that July 1st deadline is very precipitous, and typically when we see regulatory change, we allow a bit more time for the community and those affected to adjust. It might not, in fact, make very much difference, but it is in line with the timelines that our neighboring municipalities have taken to discuss the idea and then implement it in their own communities. And I think it's a courtesy, particularly in the Part 9 buildings area, where there's lots of people who are tearing down houses and thinking about doing things, and we may miss some. If we move very quickly on this, some people who really did have plans may suddenly be faced with a different outcome than they were anticipating. So I think that extra 2 months to allow for this communications and is a courtesy both to homeowners and the building industry.
Discussion on the amendment. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments by Councillor Watson and for anything that might be in process right now. Perhaps staff could just clarify for us the magnitude that this may have on applications that are in the stream, changing from a July 1st to a September 1st date, if that would be more amenable.
I'm not sure whether staff have that information easily at hand, but I will extend the invitation to Mr. Bowl if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think we saw from the presentation that a lot of new construction is close or does meet this new standard, but some don't. And I think we're talking about 2 or 3 months, 2 months extra. It might be helpful for some applicants. It's hard to gauge how many projects it would affect, but so that's a very general answer. But it's probably where the amount of time is not that critical to the overall recommendation. So it's council's will be able to implement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowl. Further discussion on the amendment. So essentially, the amendment creating an extra 2-month extension to the implementation of the zero carbon step code. Councillor Smart.
Yeah, I appreciate it being brought to that level of depth of thoughtfulness and thinking about applicants. Because the zero carbon step code doesn't have as much impact on, say, the overall design and in the same way that the energy step code does, I do feel like the amount of time given to change a boiler from gas to electric, it's plentiful, for instance. So I won't be supporting the current amendment in favor of the regional timeline.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Any other further discussion? Mayor Murdoch.
I'm just, first of all, I think the changes here probably don't need a lot of time and energy. I think it's fairly minor one way or the other. I am struck though, just in our own issues of getting a boiler replacement undertaken and the timelines required for that. I'm cognizant that there may very well be some buildings that have ordered or are waiting for a plan for a certain type of thing, and a 3-month timeline may actually be quite impactful for some smaller single-family home developers building. So I think, given that, I would be supportive of the motion as it is. It's minor, and as staff pointed out, it probably will only affect a few houses. But I think, given the difficulty that people are having sourcing things right now, it's not an unreasonable approach to this to add an extra couple of months as a courtesy.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. I too will be supporting the amendment. I think the consideration will be appreciated, and if we want to encourage best practices, this is one way to do it. Thank you.
Councillor Smart.
Thank you, through you, Acting Chair to Staff. I just want to clarify, I believe it's a 5.5 month leeway at this point, not a 3 month, if you could just clarify.
4 months, confirming till September. Excuse me, that was my misspeaking. So excuse me, until September. So the motion on the floor is to extend that till September. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
No, sorry. If we stick with the current timeline, it was just mentioned that it might be 3 months away, July 1st. So I just wanted to clarify the time frame. I guess between notice that the public would potentially be given if we stuck with the original timeline.
Bull.
Yeah, thank you. So after today's meeting and decision, we would prepare our communications. So realistically, that's out by the end of February. So that gives March, April, May, June as notice. That would be 4 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bull. Any further discussion on the second amendment to the motion on the floor? Then I will call the question on the amendment. All in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Smart opposed, so that passes. So the main motion is still on the floor as twice amended. So are there any other further amendments to the motion on the floor? Mayor Murdoch.
Sorry, thank you. No amendments. I just want to speak to the motion as a whole. And the only thing I wanted to just get clarification on really was just the last portion of this, which talked to rebate program options. It mentions EV charging and electric guarding equipment, e-bikes, EV charging and electric guarding equipment. I just want to be, so I'm clear that my support of this is that that's not a exclusive list, that there may be other ideas that could be brought forward by staff. So I just want to make it clear that these are examples, but not necessarily prescriptive.
I think I understand that to be the case, but Mr. Bull, if you can confirm.
I do think this motion has been worded this way to give focus to the next steps there. So if there are other topics we should explore, these ones are selected as the topic areas that have less grants available to them and seem logical candidates. So it would help us focus on those 3 programs or topics, as opposed to the original motion that's still standing from last year. It's quite wide. So it is meant to scope it more narrowly, but if there's a preference on the part of council to keep it more open, then we can definitely work on that as well when this comes back for further follow-up. Thank you.
Yeah, then I'll make a motion to amend that last piece to say, or other programs, suggested by staff.
Amendment moved and seconded.
The motivation to that is I think we have grant money that's funding a position to provide us expert advice on climate change pieces. I'd hate to be prescriptive at this point before that person even takes over their job. They may come with some ideas. Again, I think one of the speakers from the public mentioned, maximum bang for the buck. I think that's the lens we want to be looking through, and there may be things that we get better benefit from than these 3. So that's the rationale I just don't want to be exclusive. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'm seeing broad degree of support, or at least to the degree of nodding heads. So with Council's indulgence, I will call the question on that amendment to create a more open-ended series of projects or an exploration of additional projects for rebate. All in favor of the amendment to the motion on the floor? Any opposed? None opposed. We now have the main motion still on the floor with 3 amendments, and I appreciate Council's hard work on this one. Is there any other discussion about with respect to the main motion on the floor, which is the substance of the recommendations as presented in the staff report? Seeing none, then I will call the question on the main motion on the floor containing the staff recommendations. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much to Council. I will also seek from Council a motion to receive, because we did not actually have a motion to receive. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. That concludes this item. Thank you very much to Building Planning staff. Thank you very much, Mr. Miller, for answering all the questions. Thank you very much to all the members of the public who came to speak to this. Much appreciated. Thank you very much. Excellent discussion. I will move on to item 7.2 on the agenda, which is Public Safety Building Feasibility Study. Mr. Graham. Oh, very good. I will, I guess I have the ability to declare a 2-minute recess, I guess. Or, yeah. Okay, we are adjourned until 8:08, please. 9:08, excuse me. It all blends in together after a while. 2-minute recess. All right, everyone, I'm going to ask that we bring our meeting back to order here, please. So reconvening, again, proceeding with item 7.2 on the agenda, which is the Public Safety Building Feasibility Study and Council Project Sign-Off. I'm going to give this to Mr. Graham. Welcome, Mr. Graham. Thank you very much, and please proceed.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and Council. The Public Safety Building Feasibility Study, it's a project originating from our 2022 Facilities Master Plan. Now, just before I start on the report, I wanted to define generally what is an accepted function or the definition of a public safety building. I've had a lot of conversations with internal stakeholders and done interviews to help build this scope, and there's often a lot of confusion as to what I'm talking about. So what I've thrown up on the screen, I've got a couple slides there. So the typical definition of a public safety building is defined as a purpose-built post-disaster facility that will host police, fire, and emergency management services for the community. The levels of services and business functions that may include are fire and rescue services, police services and emergency response, fire prevention and inspection services, training and staff development, Municipal Emergency Operations Center, often called an EOC, emergency program volunteer services, police, fire, and emergency program administration offices. The facilities and grounds around these types of buildings also typically incorporate a fenced or secure training area, and it may or may not include municipal IT infrastructure, would be housed as kind of a backup facility since it's post-disaster. So I'm just going to leave that up there a little bit. Of course, the feasibility study will define exactly what these are, but just so everybody's understanding what we're talking about here. It is more than just a police and fire hall. So I should also note this project used to be referred to as a protective services building. So I'm going to apologize in advance if I slip back into that. We've reviewed this and found that was very much a colonial term. It really doesn't describe the project well. So it is a public safety building is how we're describing this. So to continue on, generally a capital project life cycle of any type of a project of this type should begin with a concept plan. You might call it a business case with an options analysis, but whatever you call it, it's going to form the core of a feasibility study to define the project at a high level. So a lot of a feasibility study, the first part is identifying what questions need to be asked, and the second half is going to be trying to identify and the answers for those questions. So this is all part of the initiation phase of an overall project life cycle, and from that we'll determine what are the best next steps. So this type of report typically gathers information through stakeholder and public consultation. It will explore the location, operating parameters of a modern, energy-efficient, post-disaster public safety building, as well as the surrounding site and its impact on existing amenities and traffic patterns. Now, the process generally followed, and I'm sorry if that's a little small to see on the screen there. We'll review all the viable options and levels of service and evaluate them against a set of technical criteria. And that'll include all options, include doing nothing. We're going to look at everything, run it through a set of technical criteria, and options not meeting or scoring low on that mandatory criteria that we have to maintain, they'll typically be discarded, and it enables the team to focus their energy on more detail on a short list of options. And additional evaluation against scoring criteria, eventually preferred option will come to light. Typically, a report also will list all of the options we've looked at, the reasons we may have included them or discarded them for your evaluation once we look at that report. We'll be identifying industry trends, political, economic, social, and technological factors that impact the project, as well as reviewing similar projects completed in other jurisdictions for lessons learned. It's always good to see what other people have done and not reinvent the wheel and learn from other mistakes, so that always helps provide a more thorough study. The existing police and fire hall is proving to be more and more inadequate to deliver the required levels of community service. The original building is more than 80 years old. It was built in 1938. It's had numerous additions over the years, the newest one being 45 years old. This essential services building is currently classified under engineering standards as functionally deficient and seismically unrestrained. So basically, to put that in common terms, it is safe, but it's too small to fit the modern equipment we use, and it won't perform very well in an earthquake. So this exercise and feasibility study will gather enough information to help you make a strategic decision moving forward, and these steps will help form decisions on the next phases if we decide to proceed with this project. Besides myself, we have Fire Chief McDonald and Police Chief Constable Fisher here tonight with us, and we'd be happy to answer any questions on this report or the project charter that's attached to it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Graham, and welcome, Chiefs Fisher and or from committee, excuse me, Councillor Braithwaite and then Councillor Patterson.
Thanks very much. Thanks so much for the report. I was looking at page 14, and it talks about the contingency fund, and basically the contingency fund is 50% of the design and consulting fee. Is that normal, or is that misprints, or what?
Mr. Graham.
I actually never broke it down as a percentage. I evaluate risk and industry trends at the moment and determine a value based on that risk. I didn't assign it any specific percentage. I'm not like taking a broad 10% percentage, but based on the roughly $150,000 that we had, I've attached a $75,000 contingency. It's not something I intend to spend, but there are risks right now with all the design and construction going on, and getting tenders to come in as part of our RFPs for this proposal is a little risky at this time.
It's shocking that it would be that high. I mean, honestly, so, okay, but thanks for the explanation.
Anything further, Councillor Braithwaite? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to staff. Although I will just back up and say I didn't find that to be an outlandish amount given the marketplace for design and consulting fees. I think it's probably wise to leave it in that range. My question, though, is reference to the report. Could you tell me how many sites within the district have potential to house this type of development?
Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, we haven't, as part of the feasibility study, we haven't taken a look. I don't want to predetermine anything. There are a number of sites that have the potential to fit the building, but there's a lot of other technical criteria such as response times to various areas in the district, both for police and fire. So that will be part of our study. There could be the perfect site to fit the building, but it may be too far away to meet our response time. So the technical criteria gets pretty interlaced when we work on those parameters.
Go ahead,
Thank you.
Councillor.
That was an answer that I was looking for. The one other explanation I would like, because of some of what is recommended in here, is the cost implications for construction of a post-disaster construction versus just typical building code. So when we talk about, multi-use like housing with these facilities, but these facilities we want to be post-disaster. And so perhaps staff could just explain so that we're all clear on what that means.
Go ahead, Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, a post-disaster building, it's a building necessary for the provision of essential services for the general public in the event of a disaster. And basically, in our case, it'd be an earthquake. In other parts of the world, it could be a tornado or a hurricane. But after some natural disaster, it doesn't just need to remain standing; it needs to remain operational. So those costs, both in terms of seismic and services, can be significant. Until we determine the size of the building, I wouldn't be able to set a dollar value to it, but post-disaster buildings are designed to a much higher level of the building code, and that will impact costs.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I have Councillor Green, Watson, and then Smart.
Thank you very much, Chair, and through you to Mr. Graham, thank you very much for this report. It's the first time I think we've actually seen it in black and white, a comprehensive assessment of what we need and where we're going. And one of the biggest concerns that's been raised with me by the public is the future of the Bowker Creek waterway. And it does bisect or dissect this property. What are the provisions that we need to make as a municipality in conjunction with, and I know you've mentioned the Friends of Bowker Creek as one of the partners in consultation. What are the immediate considerations that we have to make to protect that waterway and not to put it at risk in any way? Thank you.
Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, there's and I won't be able to quote them exactly. There's a couple of sections that I've written into the project charter, and one is that the detailed design of daylighting Boker Creek is outside the scope of this, and especially in a feasibility study, because we are looking at other locations for this building, right? It may not be here. So having said that, any evaluation of being at its existing site, I'm very familiar with the March 2020 Boker Creek report. So that's, I almost want to say that's kind of stuck up on our project wall, and we will constantly be looking at it. So I've also put in a constraint within the project charter that we'll be referring back to that and making sure that anything we do will not eliminate or get in the way of daylighting Boker Creek. The report from March 2020 even indicated a rough layout of where it would go, as well as a cross-sectional width. So we can accommodate that as part of the feasibility study for that when we assess the location that the building's existing at, currently at.
Thank you very much.
Anything further, Councillor Green? Councillor Watson, please.
I don't have a question anymore. Councillor Patterson asked it was with respect to other sites, so I've got a satisfactory answer from Mr. Graham. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watson. Councillor Smart.
Thank you, through you, Acting Chair. With regards to the assumption that part of the heritage building will remain, I'm wondering, is that broad enough to include potentially the option, if it was possible, to relocate it? Does it include the option to just save the facade? Does it include the option to fully incorporate it in a new building? I'm just wondering if you can tell me how much is at play here currently, and if council needs to inform that more.
Go ahead, Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, I've put in the project charter, and of course council can always advise me otherwise, that we wouldn't be doing a detailed design. We want to evaluate what the uses of the building could be. Potentially the building could be relocated. It's tougher with those old brick buildings. There's a high risk in that. It might be legitimate to stay at the existing site. That will of course impact where the new building goes. So there's a lot of, again, those interlocking conditions. So one of the things I want to do as part of the report is at least make a list, a brainstorm of what things could be put, what uses that building could undertake in the future. But we wouldn't be getting into detailed design of how we would bring that building up to modern code or anything like that. I don't know if that answered your question.
Councillor Smart.
That helps a bit, but I guess just to further clarify, would it give applicants the sense that they could design with an assumption that it might be able to be relocated? I just want to make sure that this feasibility study really does truly look at all options and doesn't presume that as an obstacle.
Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, no. We could be looking at moving the building. Again, when we assess those under the criteria of the report, we would be assigning like a high risk to it. It may be something that we are recommending not to do, but that would certainly be it. It is in the far corner of the lot. It's a tight corner to build in, but removing the building, again, I don't want to say demolition, so let's just say move the building because it's a heritage building, that would certainly open the site up for more uses.
Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Well, thank you. Through you, Acting Chair. I guess my other question is with regards to scope. Am I correctly understanding that there still would be a base of master planning that would be happening at this stage? Because when I looked at first at the out of scope items 1, 2, and 3, I would have expected them to be at least with the out-of-scope items as far as the, playgrounds, the daylighting of Boker Creek, the infrastructure. I would have expected at least a brush of them to inform the potential for that site.
Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, I apologize if the wording wasn't clear. I was intending that detailed design of those remaining amenity areas, we wouldn't be getting into that, but certainly as a feasibility study, we have to show what impact on the site, what areas might be left. I would also, as part of this report, again, if we look at the existing site as a preferred option, we might also want to consider, if daylighting Boker Creek were to happen, what also impact it would have, and look at it as more of a holistic program rather than a specific project. and that would inform a lot of the areas left. But the detailed design is something I want to stay away from as part of a feasibility study. It's just getting too deep into the details.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Just one additional question through you, Chair. Would you say other additional site options might be shared with the consultant? I'm wondering, does that include beyond municipal property to the potential of CRD property or purchasing property, or is it particularly just municipal-owned properties?
Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, we would be looking at, again, all options, and that could be CRD property, could even be private property if something is specific. Now, of course, when that's evaluated, there'd be the capital cost of purchasing and acquiring that property, which would obviously change the scoring of those options. But a feasibility study needs to look at all options, and that's something we would be doing.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Please proceed,
One last
Councillor
question. Through you, Chair, could you just elaborate a little bit on what council will receive next when you talk about the fact that a bunch of options may be received? Will council get to see all of the different options when they come in?
Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, short answer is yes. When I do feasibility studies, we would include all of the options that were created, how we scored them. We would typically do a heat map, what I would call heat map, to determine what items are the highest risk or the most expensive and why the committee. But the first brush will be the technical requirements for a public safety building, response times, NFPA requirements. Either of these two gentlemen can answer those in much more detail, but we would be bringing back that technical evaluation to council. I believe the next touch point with council would be the RFP selection, but after that we'd be bringing, before we go into public consultation, we'd be bringing the technical evaluation and then asking for input on other considerations that we may want to look at to refine the scoring.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. I have Mayor Murdoch and then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Appreciate all the good questions here. So I think I understand now. I was struggling a little bit to understand exactly what's coming back. So it sounds like there's sort of a ranked set of options with defining the mandatory and optional criteria sort of attached to the emergency building. Is that sort of the end goal of this project, or is it to come back at the end of the consultation with a recommended site in January 2025?
Go ahead, Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, I wish I could almost give you an example of a feasibility study that it's, of course, in my mind. But we would be looking at all the options. Like I say, the first brush would be the technical requirements that would certainly reduce the number of options available from a technical standpoint. And then we would be discussing and running those ones that have passed, we'll call it the short list. We'd be doing more of a technical evaluation, perhaps some indicative designs. I don't want to quite say we'd bring back a shopping list to you, but we would definitely be bringing back the preferred technical location, following all the technical guidelines. And then we may have a for lack of a better word, a shopping list of sustainability levels. Keep in mind, when we do a public building, we're going to be looking at a building that has a lifespan of, say, 50 years. So if we were to build it today, it'd be 2074, that it's still operational. So we're going to want to make sure that our building codes were, our baseline might be step code 4, and other net neutral levels might cost different. We might look at housing. I've included that as a constraint, that we want to look at housing above. So that might be a bit of a shopping list to say, above and beyond the protective services building, this is what these other options will cost, and allow you to make those decisions and give us guidance on how you want those to go forward.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, so then for things like that, for things that might be above the building, say housing, that could be subsidized housing where there's no net revenue, just the cost. It could also be market, like the one that the fire hall was built downtown, where the building offsets the cost of the emergency building. Is this report going to come back with sort of what the potential financial offsets of different scales of modeling attached as well, so we have some sense of what what might be, we can give further direction on? Is that a financial sort of benefit or cost of those sort of add-ons going to be included in the report?
Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, short answer is yes. As part of that, we'll call it that shopping list item, would have the pros and cons. Keep in mind, a post-disaster building, we're going to have to build any housing above it to a much higher standard as well. There'll be higher capital costs. There'll be higher overall capital costs to the project, but there will be offset life cycle costs, different step codes. We've been talking about it tonight, energy step codes. There'll be reduced operational costs, even if there's increased capital costs to create them. But so life cycle costing will be part of any part of the feasibility study that we bring forward.
Thank you. And a last question on this is just, it's mentioned in here, the technical aspects of this. Maybe this is more a question for the chiefs. But I'm curious, in that list of services over training and some of the other pieces, do they have to sit on the same site? Can they be on multiple sites? In this contemplation, is there contemplation of the main building, but also maybe a separate training site, for instance? Through you, Chair.
Chief McDonald.
Thanks. Through the chair, largely a fire question on the immediate training site piece. Again, feasibility study, there are options. Fire does not require access to training to be located in one location, so breaking it up is definitely an option.
But through your chair, the report will sort of so it'll contemplate those ideas or options as part of the feedback piece is what I'm hearing. I don't need to ask whether it will be done or anything at this point, but I just want to make sure that that's a possibility.
Mr. Graham.
It sounds like it is.
Through your chair, yes. I don't want to sound like a stuck record, but yes, we'll be looking at all options. Obviously, there will be operational benefits to have training on site and secure training area. I attended just recently a car extrication event in a training situation, and when they're using the jaws of life, there's a lot of dangerous operation going on, so that area needs to be fenced and secured, but that doesn't necessarily have to be directly next to the public safety building.
That's all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, just a question to staff. This is presented as us remaining with the current model of having the police and the fire in the same location. Will, as part of what you're looking at, would you also consider, should the need arise, kind of splitting them into separate buildings?
Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, short answer is yes, they could. Operationally, typically it's easier for secure network access, secure phone access for them to be integrated together. The security requirements to prevent hacking even on the phone systems are significant in police and fire stations. So yes, we can. We would absolutely be looking at potentially as separate buildings. Even a separate evidence building could be considered. So yes, short answer is yes.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Graham, please. I'm just looking at the levels of service and business functions that the facility might include that you've outlined in your report. And this is just fresh off a discussion I had this morning at South Island Prosperity Partnership, where we were talking about post-disaster business recovery. And you've mentioned volunteer services in Oak Bay as needing a space, but I wondered if there are other community uses like that should be part or considered in the feasibility study as programmatic, so that if a group in the community that's providing a pivotal role, like our business community, also needs support, if this building would be the place where they could get, their spot or connect to the others who are dealing with post-disaster situations.
Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, a building of this type would typically have community space within it, even if it's the EOC area. Again, in that sort of a situation, the EOC would take precedence and take over that community space. So there's typically buildings of this type might have a larger kitchen. We'd be building a kitchen for firefighters anyhow. We might make it larger to be able to provide services to the community in the event of a disaster. So those sort of things are going to be probably best discussed when we bring the technical aspects back to you, because if you wanted to make the building larger in scope, to go beyond the technical requirements of a public safety building, to include community supports, that would be the time that we could discuss that in more detail. That would be my recommendation anyhow.
Thank you.
I'd like to get to questions from the public. I appreciate council's questions on this. I know there's some folks who have been waiting to address council on this point, so I will leave it open to those who would like to speak to public or speak to council on this matter. And again, just as a reminder, approximately 3 minutes, and just going to need your name and your municipality of residence, and you're welcome to address the committee. Thank you very much. Please come forward.
Hello, council and committee members. My name is Jane Evans. I live in Oak Bay, and I appreciate how necessary this is and how much work it is, technically complicated. And I appreciate the discussion tonight. It helps me understand a little bit more about the stage you're at. But I do need to state how, in reading the council project sign off, under project purpose, page 3, it refers to the study exploring the surrounding site and its impact on existing amenities and traffic patterns. And then later on, there's discussion or reference to housing. And I'm concerned that this does not include impacts to Bowker Creek watershed or the natural stormwater management. Under relating to council priorities, page 4, climate change and environment, the document only identifies energy as a focus, whereas a significant impact to climate change is the lack of water management, retention, and flow duration to sustainable vegetation and wildlife, including stormwater from buildings, stormwater on that site. And in the deliverables, page 14, it states that the study provides a solid foundation for the next steps and is not found to be missing any components or considerations. So this is what you're hoping the deliverable will be for moving forward in the planning for the building. But I believe that key components for consideration at Firefighters Park in particular should specifically include the Buried Creek stormwater management and the opportunity for ecosystem restoration. I feel that this is just as important as traffic management. And that's what when I read traffic pattern, I'm thinking, our focus on traffic. But I realize probably you're also speaking about traffic as in getting the police cars out, getting the fire trucks out. But in first reading this, I feel like we've got to look after our environment as much as we look after traffic. So I feel like that should be an important part of any feasibility study for this site in particular or any site. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Evans. Please come forward.
Thank you, Chair Appleton, Mayor and Council and staff. And my name is Ian Graham, 2615 Dean Avenue. And I'm speaking on behalf of the Friends of Bowker Creek Society. We have over 200 members and volunteers around Greater Victoria, including Oak Bay. We submitted a letter this afternoon. I think you probably all got it. I just wanted to highlight just a couple of points, and I really appreciate Mr. Graham for clarifying some of the points in the report. It does seem clear that we are looking at multiple sites, but that the existing site is sort of on the table. And we totally acknowledge the need for an updated public safety building, but we are disappointed that Bowker Creek is identified as out of scope, and we feel that that direction is unnecessarily constraining and limits some of the opportunities to integrate this large public investment with watershed health and stream stewardship. So I described the three or four of those policy documents that in the OCP, the Bowker Creek Blueprint, the daylighting feasibility study, and a subsequent report that the former Director of Engineering brought to this council in 2021. And it really focuses on considering the daylighting and a multi-use greenway and that principle of being opportunistic. When these opportunities come up, we should look at, you know, that holistic, I think you used the holistic program. And so, you know, just by way of comparison to close, to finish up here, I just wanted to point out the example of the Oak Bay High School redevelopment project, another really important public investment, $50 million if memory serves me, completed in 2015. And the initial focus was on education, right? But that project ended up including a strong Bowker Creek component that involved some really significant partnerships. The school district came on board with the municipality, the Bowker Creek Initiative, the whole school community, teachers, students, and opportunities to integrate the creek and natural assets into the high school redevelopment were explored right from the get-go. You know, that's how it happened. You know, those things were put out there on the table right at the get-go. And the creek component, you may recall this, it attracted almost $750,000 of federal gas tax funds, and 100% of that was spent in this municipality. Former Mayor Nils Jensen, you know, he was a real champion for that project, and you know, what a legacy. If you go out there today, it started as an education focus, and it became, you know, much larger. So getting back to the public safety building, we just urge council to revisit some of those out of scope items, particularly the creek and some of the amenities, and really reconsider that, and you know, look at the potential for synergies and integration and exploring, and that should happen sooner, be happening sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Graham. Anybody else wish to address council? Yes, please come forward. Oh, just need to press that button right in the middle of there, Mr. Harris. Thank you.
My name is Gerald Harris. I live in Victoria. I'm one of the directors of Friends of Bowker Creek, and I spend most of my Bowker Creek efforts in Oak Bay in the Stream Keepers group here. I want to look at another excluded item. It's probably related to Bowker Creek, but it's excluding consideration of storm drain and stormwater infrastructure from the report. And this, I think, is really relevant if we're talking about an emergency management services building and a public safety building, because the site where the fire hall is now was identified as far back as 2007 and before as a place that is going to flood. And it was made very clear in Bowker Creek Master Drainage Plan back in 2007 when flood risks were projected for the various levels of flood over the coming decades, and the parts of the stream that would be affected by the floods, and the part of the stream that's most affected by the flooding is probably from Oak Bay Rec Center down through Fireman's Park, and these projections were made before climate change came into the picture. So before we were talking about yet perhaps a 25% increase in the intensity of winter rainfall events. And in that report, again, going back to 2007, the sections of trunk storm drain that were the most under capacity and should have the first priorities for being dealt with were identified, and the first of those concrete infrastructure projects was the Beach Drive culvert, but the next one was the Fireman's Park storm drain in priorities of what should be done first. So it's something that, again, particularly since this is a building, it's a part of town that people will really need to have access into and out of, and will need to be functional. I believe you can't separate storm water management from consideration of that site. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Appreciate your comments. Does anybody else wish to address the committee? Please.
Is it on?
You are? Yes, go ahead.
I'm Pam Woodland. I live on Newport Avenue in Oak Bay. Thank you for all your hard work. Everybody's still here. It's a long night. I want to go to bed. And I want to speak for Boker Creek. I want to bring in the people, plants, and the critters. We're talking about an integrated system, and we need every bit of the natural environment for ourselves and for our community. When there is a disaster, because it's going to happen, when there is a disaster, we're going to need our natural spaces. We're going to have some way of having people experience a little bit of joy in their lives. When you walk from here to the high school through the Boker Creek passageway, there is a palpable physical feeling, the difference of walking along that pathway along the creek from walking along any of the streets. People relax. All of those metrics that indicate health, well-being. Think of a traumatized population. And this is just talking about the human factor. The only way human beings can benefit from the health of the creek is if the creek has health. And so if Boker Creek is daylighted, is remained as just an if, and not as a priority consideration, you're putting an if to the health and well-being of everybody in this community. So I'm going to go to bed soon. I hope you guys get to too.
Thank you very much, Ms. Woodland. I appreciate your comments. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the committee? Come forward at this time. I'm not seeing anything. I don't have a monitor that shows me anybody online, but I'm going to assume that if somebody is online, that somebody will flag me. But I'm not seeing anything at this time. Thank you very much for your comments. It's much appreciated. And of course, with Mr. Graham present, I'm sure he's undertaking, listening very closely to what you have to say. So I really appreciate you taking the time and being patient to stick with us through our agenda. With that, I will return to the committee table. Mayor Murdoch.
Yeah, thank you, through your chair. I think before or anybody wants to make a motion on this, I'm supportive of the recommendation here based on the conversation, but I think it might be helpful to have Mr. Graham just speak to the Boker Creek piece. He did briefly. What I heard was sort of that we're looking at multiple sites, and so the detailed design of the site was not on the table at this time. The Boker Creek, protective areas would be considered in the analysis of that. I just want to make sure I'm hearing from Mr. Graham just because there's many concerns raised here about this being quote unquote out of scope, but I just want to make sure that we're clear that what that actually looks like in the real.
Agreed, Your Worship. So, Mr. Graham, if you'd like to comment on that.
Thank you. And through the chair, there's a number of things there. I've made some notes, and one thing I do want to mention: I typically walk home from work. I typically walk down Monterey and along the Boker Creek Trail. So there's a small group of us. We call ourselves Creek Freaks, and so I'm very familiar with the creek. I typically take that path, especially in the summer, because it's a lot cooler to walk along the creek than it is along the roads. So I'm very familiar with that. So a couple of things to note: stormwater management. I want to make sure, and again, this is up to council to give me direction, but A feasibility study is very early on. I flipped up the one slide, and I apologize, it's a little hard to read. We need bigger TVs, but a feasibility study is very, very early on in the initiation project, part of a project. So I don't want it to balloon too large that we're getting into detailed designs. So talking about stormwater management, again, I haven't brought this forward, but any project that the district should be doing, in my opinion, should be at least gold LEED, and LEED building standards deal with stormwater management, stormwater retention, things like that. Post-disaster buildings also have to follow certain standards as to managing stormwater from sump pumps to a number of other conditions. I won't get into details of it, but so as part of the feasibility study that just is really just determining where this building should go and not getting into detailed design, it wasn't my intention to get into detailed design of services, whether this building would require the services along whatever road and location we choose, whether it needs to be upgraded or not. So again, if we are looking at the existing site, and we absolutely should be looking at Boca Creek, if that were to be added as part of the project when we get onto the more of the planning and the detailed design level. If council chooses to have that done, it would be a good time. We're developing the site. It might be an opportune time. Holistically, I would still suggest we treat it as a separate project with its own separate budget and its own separate scope. But from a program standpoint, it would be good to incorporate it at that time if we in fact decide that that location is the best. So when I talk about it being out of scope, it's out of scope in terms of a feasibility study for the public safety building. When we get to the point of detailed design, that should absolutely be discussed, that it could be considered to be in scope. I don't know if that helps clarify that. Feasibility study should be kept quite high level, and we're not getting into detailed design. That's
Appreciate that clarification, Mr. Graham.
Thank you.
Your worship.
I'm happy to move the motion that the report be received.
Moved and seconded. So I will call the question on receipt. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
I'm happy to make the recommendation, the staff recommendation, that the scope of the public safety building feasibility study be approved as outlined.
Moved and seconded. Yep, discussion, Councillor Braithwaite and then Councillor Smart.
I just really want to say, Mr. Graham, it's always a pleasure to get a report from you. You do your report so well, and there's just so few questions that we would have to ask you, and so I truly appreciate what you bring to the table for us to look at. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite, and agreed wholeheartedly. Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate the sort of further clarification around the first part of this really being a site selection exercise followed by a feasibility of more preferred options. I guess my question is just to make sure when we have our checkpoint, which I believe is in September, what is the definition of success that will be used to evaluate this heat mapping of the different options? Because I just want to, I guess, make sure when that comes back to council that it's also council's definition of success, and it just wasn't entirely clear to me, you know, beyond obviously the primary concerns about it working well for the police department and the fire department, what other definitions of success that council may bring to that and that some of the public has introduced today? Because, for instance, if it is on the current site that the public safety buildings are on now, I think, speaking for myself, you know, daylighting Boca Creek would be part of that success. So I'm curious what the definition of success is. Thanks.
Go ahead, Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, I could talk a very long time about this because that is always hard to define from a project management standpoint, especially in feasibility studies. As I mentioned earlier, the first half of a feasibility study is identifying the questions that need to be asked and then answering them. So coming up with a strong success criteria is difficult. It's not like as easy as saying on time and on budget. So it's more of a consensus that, you know, council has been consulted to the extent that they feel comfortable. The public has been consulted. We've looked at different options. Like I say, I hate to call it a shopping list, but bringing a shopping list that has the options available, that you can pick and choose what's needed and make those political decisions, whether we go forward with them. So a large part of it is making sure that we've covered as many options, and typically, like I say, the first, and you're right, I think the first touch point is in September. We'd be bringing back the technical analysis of what's needed, and then we would be looking at those less technical, the subjective options, such as including housing, such as including Boker Creek, if in fact we choose the existing location. So that's when we'll have a more robust discussion about getting your criteria on the more subjective standards that we should be evaluating this on. So at this early stage, I would like to think the success criteria is that we have at least got a list of all the questions that need to be asked. And beyond that, that's what the feasibility study is going to start identifying answers for.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Well, thank you. You know, that helps quite a bit, just to know that we can have that touch point later. I guess one of my specific questions, I guess, would be around just like the structural site classification of the different sites that might be looked at. And I would imagine something like that would be information that might come back to us about which areas are most resilient in a disaster.
Go ahead, Mr. Graham.
Through the chair, absolutely, geotechnical analysis will be critical in determining overall capital costs for like a Class D budget. We have already done geotechnical testing for the existing site. We'll be looking at and identifying other sites, and if they meet the technical requirements for response times and their district-owned property, I would be able to go and do more geotechnical testing on those sites to be able to better evaluate the post-disaster design that might be required.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Thank you, Councillor Smart. Before I go to Mayor Murdoch, I might seek a motion from the committee to extend by 10 minutes. Very well, Your Worship. Go right ahead.
Speaking in support of the motion, I do really appreciate the professionalism of staff and knowing that makes it very easy to give a confidence on this, that things like geotechnical flooding, these sorts of things are obviously going to be contemplated in that. And I do appreciate this is a difficult piece to piece together. I was, looking at this coming forward, picturing all the possible places, but if that were its location, how many other things would have to change and the kind of cascading, it's a difficult piece. So I think that the approach taken here of let's define what we need and then we can do some analysis of where it will go is the right approach. I'm supportive of this report and the piece forward. So those are my words. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Any further questions? Any further comments on the motion on the floor? I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much, Mr. Graham, and thank you very much, Chiefs Fisher and McDonald, for being here. Really appreciate that. Item 8 is new business. I'm not aware of any new business. Seeing none from the committee, then I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved. And call the question. The motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to come out. Thank you very much to staff.